Chapter 362. Gomong smiled and said, "Originally, I wanted to use your body as a medium to lead Mu Yumbing again, but I've changed my mind. I realize that you're not an ordinary human. You have the characteristics of our Mu Yumbing. You don't like killing and you like living a peaceful life. Among the 5 elements Yumming, only our Mu Yumming has the same personality as you." The Mu Yuman was different from the other Yuman. They pursued a prosperous life and liked to live peacefully in the forest with plants as their companions. Just like Muyu, he didn't like killing. Every time his life disappeared, he would feel very uncomfortable. However, in the cultivation world, there was killing at every moment. If he didn't kill, someone would kill him. This was the law of the cultivation world. No one could stay out of it. Gomong continued. In fact, all the wars were instigated by the Threefold Palace. We just don't want the Threefold Palace to continue using us as tools. If there's one person who can overthrow the Threefold Palace, it's definitely you. And I only need to be a bystander. You think too highly of me. Muyu laughed at himself. If he had that ability, he wouldn't have been unable to protect Deadwood Daddy. In front of the Triple Palace's enforcers, he was so small. How could he face the Triple Palace's guardian? Gomong smiled slightly. In the past, I always thought that Jianing Chunfeng would stand out to overthrow the Triple Palace. He was indeed the most likely. However, I think it's too difficult for him to recover his cultivation. Now, I'm more willing to bet on you, because you have power that Jianing Chunfeng doesn't have. If I had power, I wouldn't be so helpless. Muyu shook his head. Gomong ignored Muyu and said, "Didn't you notice that Mu Ling's sword has undergone an abnormal change? It's no longer pure life energy. Instead, it's mixed with an endless amount of death energy. The death energy of the underworld grass has changed it. This is something I didn't expect. You must know that the netherworld grass is an ethereal law used by the heavenly Tao to monitor the balance of the world. Being tainted by the netherworld grass death aura means complete death, with no possibility of revival." The Mu Ling sword had indeed undergone a strange transformation. Its body was filled with an endless aura of death, but it was also a treasure full of vitality. These 2 auras made it stand out from the rest. But how could Muyu be in the mood to care about this? Mu Ling is an item of the 5 elements that has existed since the formation of the world. In the eyes of Mu Yumeng, it is a symbol of life, full of vitality. However, it has now become an item of life and death. Even I do not know what will happen to it in the future. If you transfer all of the death aura from the underworld grass to the wood spirit, it will become a sacred weapon of death. Not only will the life force of any human, demon, or Yumeng killed by the wood spirit be sucked into the wood spirit, even their souls won't be able to escape. Gomong raised his voice slightly and even seemed to be inexplicably excited. In other words, the killings you create will not provide soul power to the 3rd palace. Your killings will be meaningless killings to the 3rd palace. I said before I don't want to kill. Muyu emphasized. Gomong sized up Muyu and said, "You misunderstood me. Whether you kill or not is your own choice. Every time someone dies in the cultivation world, the 3rd palace's power will increase by a bit. You will inevitably kill people in the future, and every person you kill will provide soul power to the 3rd palace. However, with the Mu Ling sword, it will be a different story." Muyu's mind moved. If I use Mu Ling's sword to kill people, the 3rd palace will not receive soul power? Gomong waved his hand, and the leaves in front of him began to flutter before being pushed aside by him. Although he looked exactly the same as Muyu, the 2 of them had completely different temperaments. Gomong's flatfish body had a trace of shrewdness and maturity. This was because he had lived for so long and had seen so many ups and downs. His experience was far from what Muyu could compare to. That's right, the Mu Ling sword in your hand is the bane of soul power. Therefore, if you use Mu Ling's sword to fight people from the 3rd palace, you will cause them great harm if you injure them. That's because all of their power is based on soul power. Soul power has no advantage in front of a wood spirit sword that has been tainted by the aura of death. Once you grow up in the future, you will become the person who can suppress the 3rd palace. The third palace still does not know about the abnormality of the Mu Ling sword in your hand, so you still have the initiative. Soul power came from life, but also represented death. The death chi of the netherworld grass was the purest form of death energy. If Muyu could control this kind of power, he would become an uncontrollable factor for the third palace. I understand what you mean. Muyu nodded. The third palace instigated war on one hand, but also played the role of savior on the other. The only reason behind this was to solidify their position on the third continent. Their strength came from the soul power produced by the passing of life. This was why they were happy to see cultivators and Yumon slaughter each other. The more people died, the stronger they became. However, they would never have thought that Muyu would turn out like this. If I cause a massacre and break the ninth heaven's sealing formation, and you don't want to take over my body, then what is your goal? Muyu asked again. Don't forget, the power I have in your body is only equivalent to half of my original power. The other half is not in your body. If you can destroy the third palace and end this war, then I don't mind giving up the other half of my power. Gomong's gaze became very deep. Muyu stared at Gomong. This person had the same face as him. He had a lazy expression as if nothing had anything to do with him. However, he could see through everything, including Muyu's heart. However, Muyu did not completely believe Gomong's words. He was a rational person and would not be blinded by sorrow and hatred. Gomong's words seemed reasonable, but in fact, they could be smearing Sanchong's reputation. Muyu needed to find out the truth of this matter by herself. However, regardless of whether Gomong was defaming the threefold palace or not, Muyu hated the threefold palace to the bone. This was because Deadwood's father had told him that the person who didn't want him to live was the guardian of the threefold palace. Where's the other half of your power? You don't need to worry about that. If you want to save Deadwood, then make your own decision. Gomong sat down. The leaves around him were still dancing in the air. Muyu looked at Gomong and continued, How much do you know about the immortal confinement prison? Immortal confinement prison? It's truly a grand array. Back then, before this array was built, I was sent into the cycle of reincarnation. That's why I don't know who built it. However, I am sure that Deadwood Evergreen is right. He must have participated in the construction of the immortal confinement prison. Sword Shadow and Dustwind alone would not have been able to build such a huge formation. This formation is the pinnacle of your human race's formations. I have to admit that it surpasses Yu Meng's 5 elements formation. I don't know much about it. Gomong did not hide anything. Do you know everything about me? Muyu asked. Yes, because I am you. We are inseparable. Gomong smiled. I know what you want to do. You want to learn Deadwood Evergreen's formation techniques, but you are afraid that I will find out. Perhaps there are other ways to break the 9 Heavens Demon sealing formation apart from killing. I am also very curious. However, since we have a common enemy, I don't need to take over your body. You will take care of it for me, right? What are the limits of your in the blink of an eye ability to revive a person? Muyu asked coldly. To revive a person, you need to find that person's soul. After a person dies, their soul will float in the world for 6 years without dissipating. Unless you have something like the Gate of Hell, there is no way to capture their soul. If you want to revive Deadwood Evergreen, you have to find a way to break the 9 Heavens Demon sealing formation as soon as possible. At the same time, you have to preserve Deadwood Evergreen's body. When the time comes, I will go and find his soul. Gomong smiled. He knew that he had convinced Muyu. Okay, I will learn formation techniques and break the 9 Heavens Demon sealing formation. Help me revive Deadwood Daddy. Muyu snorted coldly. He was already planning to leave this place. A gust of wind came from nowhere, and the leaves in the forest suddenly became more and more numerous, gradually clustered in front of Muyu's eyes. Muyu only felt a flash in front of her eyes, and her whole consciousness returned to her body. He lowered his head and looked at Deadwood's pale face. Sorrow swept over him once again. The mottled green and black sword of Mu Ling floated in front of him. This was a sacred weapon of death that specialized in suppressing the Triple Palace's soul power. He didn't know how to treat Mu Ling. The slaughter it caused wouldn't increase the Triple Palace's power, but it would still severely damage it. But did he really have to kill? If killing wasn't to solve a problem, then everything would be meaningless. No matter what, he had to save Deadwood. Deadwood had been running around for others his whole life. It wasn't easy for him to live for himself. He shouldn't die like this. Dad, let's go home. Muyu wiped away his tears. This might be the last time he shed tears. When he decided to avenge Deadwood, he knew that he couldn't be merciful and cowardly anymore. The hatred between him and Stargate wouldn't end here. At the same time, he also knew about the sins of the Triple Palace. Right now, he didn't have anyone to rely on. He could only face two giant peaks alone, one of which was the unreachable Triple Palace. When he walked on this path, it meant that he would be opposed by many people. Whether it was his master, senior brothers, senior sisters, or friends, they wouldn't let Muyu face these things alone. They also wouldn't let Muyu undo the seal of the ninth heaven sealing demon formation to avenge Deadwood. Deadwood would also oppose Muyu's actions if he was still alive. Muyu hugged Deadwood's body and walked step by step. He didn't know where he was going to go, but his heart had never been so calm. Chunyin relied on Muyu's shadow clone sword and finally led the others to find him. However, everyone was silent because they knew that they were still a step too late. Muyu, don't do anything stupid. Chunyin accompanied Muyu and said solemnly. Muyu smiled. What kind of stupid thing can I do? That's right. What kind of stupid thing could he do? Looking for heaven is not waiting for nothing. He had to find heaven is not waiting. But the real mastermind behind the scenes was Sancho. He was so weak now, if he didn't have any power before. He didn't know how to explain Triple Palace's actions to his senior brother. Triple Palace had always been very secretive and wouldn't leave behind any evidence. They even had an excuse to kill Deadwood. His strength alone was too insignificant. I can understand your sadness, but you have to understand that there are many things. Luo Shang said. I know. Muyu interrupted Luo Shang. No one could understand his pain at this moment. No one understood what the existence of the dead tree meant to Muyu. They didn't understand Deadwood Evergreen. They only knew that Deadwood Evergreen was a person who was good at playing with poison. In everyone's impression, people who dealt with poison weren't good people. They even knew that the reason Deadwood Evergreen helped Muyu was so that Feng Haochen could save Miao Yuyan. They always thought that Deadwood Evergreen was using Muyu. However, only Muyu knew that Deadwood had always cared for him like a father, even though his way of expressing fatherly love was always so rough. However, a father was such a person. He wouldn't easily express his love for you, but he would always silently wait for you behind your back, as silent as a mountain. Rebellious children would always make their fathers angry, but their fathers would only forgive their disrespect in anger. Chapter 363. As the rain poured down, Muyu's whole body emitted a strong spiritual power, blocking all the rain outside. He didn't want Deadwood's father to get wet. Xiao Shui walked over and silently looked at Deadwood. She didn't have any interactions with Deadwood, but she knew how important Deadwood was to Muyu. When they were in the small courtyard, the relationship between Deadwood and Muyu made Xiao Shui very envious. Deadwood was an elder who would scold people at the slightest provocation, but when he scolded Muyu, it was more like a strange way of communicating. It was so casual and without any pretense. Muyu would always have a happy smile in front of Deadwood. He would never get angry because he was scolded. They were indeed like father and son. Xiao Shui stretched out her finger and gently tapped on Deadwood's body. The surrounding raindrops seemed to come alive and slowly wrapped around Deadwood's body. Then, they slowly turned into ice crystals and covered Deadwood. These ice crystals seemed to have a mind of their own as they changed with Muyu's movements. At the same time, they washed away the blood and stains on Deadwood's body. The dead tree looked so peaceful in the ice crystal, as if it was just sleeping. Every detail of its body was perfectly preserved. Thank you. Muyu stretched his hand into the ice crystal and smoothed Deadwood's clothes. Then, he tidied up his messy hair. Xiao Shui bit her finger and dripped a drop of blood on the ice crystal. She softly said, "This ice crystal will be preserved in this state forever." His body won't suffer any damage until you do what you want to do. Xiao Shui had already guessed what Mu Yu wanted to do. She knew that Gomong in Mu Yu's body had the ability to change life and death in the blink of an eye. Most likely, Mu Yu wanted to use this ability to save Deadwood. However, because of the seal, he had lost this ability. He had to think of a way to break the seal first. That would definitely take a long time. Deadwood's body should be protected. Xiao Shui's words reminded Qingyan and Luo Shang, causing them to frown slightly. If you want to revive him, you'll have to borrow Gomong's power, which means you'll have to undo the Nine Heavens demon sealing formation. This is a very dangerous matter. You can't take this risk. Qingyan hesitated for a moment before speaking. Master will not allow you to do this. Senior Ku Mu also participated in the Nine Heavens sealing demon formation. They are not willing to let you undo the Nine Heavens sealing demon formation for him, Luo Shang said solemnly. Voices of opposition. Mu Yu had also expected such persuasion. He understood that his senior apprentice brothers would oppose it, but he did not want to refute anything. His senior brothers had their concerns, but Mu Yu also had his own thoughts. He only knew that dead trees should not die. I just want to send him back to the Danding sect, to Elder Lung Bingxue. That was his last wish. Mu Yu stopped. His voice was surprisingly calm, but did not have the usual liveliness. Instead, there was an indescribable sense of resistance, which made it difficult for others to approach. You don't need to follow me. I won't do anything stupid. I know what I'm doing, Mu Yu said. He carried Deadwood and soared into the sky, turning in a different direction and heading towards the Danding sect. Dragon Vine also soared into the sky, shrinking and landing on Mu Yu's shoulder. Little Shui lay beside Dragon Vine. The two of them did not quarrel this time. They knew that this was not the time to quarrel. Cheng Yin and Luo Shang looked at each other. Luo Shang wanted to follow, but Cheng Yin stopped him. Let him go. Some things need to be borne by himself. Although he has caused a lot of trouble, he is not a reckless person. Master told us that as long as we feel that something is right, we should do it. Mu Yu is very obedient. If he feels that he did not do anything wrong, then we should not stop him. Qingyan looked at Mu Yu's back. This little junior brother of his was always causing trouble, but he was also optimistic. But today, Mu Yu's behavior was so abnormal. He understood that Mu Yu was no longer the little junior brother who needed his protection. People should learn to grow up. They could not always rely on others. Only Xiao Shui followed. She did not know why she followed Mu Yu. She only knew that at this time, Mu Yu should not bear this pain alone. The road back to the Danding sect was very long. Mu Yu flew silently, and Xiao Shui followed beside him. Xiao Shui was different from the others. She did not say anything to comfort Mu Yu. She just quietly accompanied Mu Yu so that he would not feel lonely or irritable. They flew for 4 days and 4 nights. Mu Yu did not stop. He just blindly flew without saying anything. By the time he arrived at the Pill Cauldron School, the disciples of the Pill Cauldron School had already recognized Mu Yu. No one dared to stop him, so he went back to the Pill Cauldron School without any hindrance. He went to the mountain where Lung Bingxue was. It was drizzling. Lung Bingxue looked into the distance from the pavilion on the mountain peak. She did not know why, but she felt a little upset. She kept feeling that something was going to happen. She thought of Ku Mu, the man who she had waited for her whole life. He said that he would return to her side after solving Mu Yu's matter. She felt a little more at ease. That blockhead, when will he come back? A disciple ran over in a panic to report that someone had broken into Freezing Peak. Lung Bingxue frowned. She had never met anyone who dared to break into Freezing Peak. Freezing Peak was in the Danding sect. It was impossible for outsiders to break in. But which disciple of the Danding sect dared to do such a thing? But Lung Bingxue soon knew who had come. Mu Yu carried Ku Mu and walked towards Lung Bingxue step by step. His steps were very heavy, and his face was filled with endless sorrow. When Lung Bingxue's eyes fell on Ku Mu, she was stunned. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, splitting the dark clouds. It also made her panic. The person she had been longing for had finally returned. But he could no longer speak. Lung Bingxue stared at Ku Mu in a daze. Her heart suddenly became empty. She didn't yell or ask what was going on. She just slowly took the dead wood and hugged the man in her arms. This bastard had escaped for most of his life. Finally, he had come home. Tears fell silently. She stared at Kumu in a daze. There was no room for anyone else in her eyes. The wind and rain blew on the mountain peak. Leaves flew everywhere. But all the raindrops and leaves could not get close to Lung Bingxue and Kumu. They hugged each other tightly in the rain. No one disturbed them. Is it sure, Dang Tian? Lung Bingxue asked softly. Tianbu Wai framed him and made him kill an extreme immortal. San Chong Gong killed him in the name of breaking the rules. Mu Yu's heart was filled with hatred, but he was very calm. He had already buried his sorrow. The path of revenge did not need sorrow. Stargate, sure Dang Tian. I know. Lung Bingshue's fingertips brushed across Ku Mu's face, but her eyes were filled with determination. She knew that Tianbu Wai was the young master of Stargate. She also knew about the relationship between Shi Dang Tian and Stargate. She already had a rough idea of what was right and wrong. If someone told her that Shi Dang Tian was not involved in this matter, she would not believe it. Taoist Yundan also rushed over when he heard the news. Yao Wuji, Kai Lai, and the others were with him. Only Shi Dang Tian was missing. The moment they saw Ku Mu, their expressions changed drastically. I just heard that Ku Mu killed someone on the Extreme Immortal Leaderboard. What's going on? Taoist Yundan asked in a deep voice. Ku Mu was his junior brother and Mu Yu's master. Whether it was Mu Yu's identity or ability, he could not ignore this matter. Mu Yu was able to remove the wood dregs from pill refinement masters' bodies. He was also able to fuse incomplete pills. Taoist Yuanda was able to break through the tribulation passing stage to become a tier 8 pill refinement master because of Mu Yu. The reason why Mu Yu helped Yundan and the others was because of Ku Mu. Now that Ku Mu was no longer around, the Pill Cauldron sect no longer had anything that Mu Yu would miss. If Taoist Yundan did not deal with Ku Mu properly, it was very likely that Mu Yu would hate the Pill Cauldron sect. Even though Mu Yu was the sect master of the Pill Cauldron sect, Taoist Yundan was not stupid enough to use this identity to restrict Mu Yu. Tian Buwaiting used a slave pill to frame Ku Mu and controlled him to kill an extreme immortal. Mu did not want to explain too much. Do you have evidence? Taoist Yundan's heart was filled with anger. The Pill Cauldron sect and Stargate were both righteous sections. If they were to become enemies, as the sect master of the Pill Cauldron sect, Taoist Yundan would not choose to forcefully fall out with Stargate unless he had solid evidence. Mu Yu shook his head. He did not expect the Pill Cauldron sect to stand on his side. All of this was just his side of the story. It was not enough to convince Taoist Yundan. Since Tian Buwaiting dared to do this, he had already guessed the consequences. As the young sect master of Stargate, he was not a good-for-nothing like Tian Yun. Instead, he was a meticulous person. He knew what would happen if he killed Ku Mu with his own hands. Therefore, he did not let Mu Yu have any evidence against him. Mu Yu, you have to know that if there is no solid evidence. Taoist Yundan hesitated. I know. I will deal with this matter myself. I will not make things difficult for you. Mu Yu calmly replied. He did not intend to let Taoist Yundan intervene. Even if he found out that Ku Mu's death was related to Shi Dang Tian, Taoist Yundan would not let Shi Dang Tian pay with his life. Shi Dang Tian was the sect master of the Pill Cauldron sect. He had absolute authority in the sect. He was not like Ku Mu, who was always outside and did not care about the sect's affairs. The two had completely different contributions to the Pill Cauldron sect. Ku Mu's death and Shi Dang Tian's death were two completely different concepts. Take good care of his body. This ice crystal will ensure that his body will never rot. Don't bury him. This is his last wish. Mu Yu said. This was not Ku Mu's last wish. It was Mu Yu's wish. However, he could not tell Lung Bingxue what he wanted to do. I understand. Lung Bingxue nodded silently. However, her eyes did not leave Ku Mu for even a moment. If this was Ku Mu's last wish, she would definitely help Ku Mu achieve it. Deadwood Daddy said that he is willing to be with you forever. I have already handed him over to you. Take good care of him. I will come back to see him often. As long as his body is intact, I will even... Muyu pursed his lips. There will be a way to wake him up. Lung Bingxue suddenly raised her head and looked at Muyu. However, Muyu had already turned around and walked down the mountain. After taking a few steps, he stopped and said in a cold voice, "The slave pill was invented by my master, Jianing Chunfeng. It was used to control you, Meng. The pill recipe fell into your hands, but you used it in improper ways. You must remember this. Kumu died because one of you refined the slave pill. This is a forbidden drug in the 3 continents. If I see another slave pill, I will definitely make him pay the price." Muyu's cold gaze swept over Taoist Yun Dan and the others. Then, his eyes revealed a strong, murderous intent. "Also, I will definitely kill Shi Dengtian." Murderous intent suddenly swept out from Muyu's body. Taoist Yun Dan and the others' expressions changed slightly. They wanted to refute something, but Muyu had already soared into the sky and left without looking back. Chapter 364. At the top of the withered tree valley. The breeze blew against the cliff. Muyu sat quietly on the edge of the cliff, looking at the distant scenery in a daze. He had been sitting here for nearly a month. He hadn't gone anywhere and had only fallen into endless sorrow. Xiao Shui had been by his side the whole time and hadn't said anything. However, she had left at this moment to take little Shui to find something to eat in the city and bring some food back for Muyu. Only Long Tongue accompanied Muyu. Muyu touched the blood jade ink crystal. The blood jade ink crystal in his hand flickered. It was a relic that Deadwood had left for Muyu before he died. Deadwood Daddy had told Muyu that it recorded how he had used his cultivation during the Jindan period to almost kill the severed soul stage Tianbu Wai. Muyu had almost forgotten about the existence of this blood jade ink crystal. After Deadwood Daddy died, he didn't want to do anything. He didn't even want to see what was inside the blood jade ink crystal. "Muyu, are you really not going to take a look at the blood jade ink crystal left behind by Deadwood Daddy?" Long Tongue stared at the blood jade ink crystal and asked. Muyu smiled bitterly. He didn't think that this blood jade ink crystal could bring him anything. However, it was still a relic left behind by Deadwood Daddy. Muyu couldn't just throw it away. He casually poured his spirit power into the blood jade ink crystal. The blood jade ink crystal suddenly released a blood-red brilliance. Then a figure emerged from the blood jade ink crystal. Muyu suddenly jumped up. "Deadwood Daddy?" The figure in front of him was the Deadwood who always had a straight face. The man who was not good with words was reflected in Muyu's eyes at this moment. "Muyu, don't be too excited. If you see this image that I recorded with a formation, it means that I am no longer here. Because if I were still alive, I would never give this thing to you, lest you always come over and make fun of me." The look of surprise on Muyu's face dimmed and was replaced by deep disappointment. How he wished that Deadwood's father would rush out and scold him. Even if he didn't agree with him, he would kick him or raise his hand and slap him on the back of his head. He would never fight back, nor would he dodge. He would definitely make Deadwood's father feel satisfied and vent the anger in his heart. The dead tree in front of him actually gave Muyu a gentle smile for the first time. That smile was so comforting and heartwarming, just like a great father smiling at his son with gratification. Deadwood Daddy rarely smiled at Muyu. He was like a taciturn gourd, hiding his feelings in the bottom of his heart. Muyu said that he would never cry again. When he embarked on the road of revenge, he disguised his feelings. Tears were just the hypocrisy of the weak. But Deadwood Daddy's smile in front of him completely shattered the disguise that Muyu had just established, and he cried again. If the unsmiling Deadwood Daddy could smile at him, then Muyu was willing to be a hypocrisy weakling. He was Deadwood Daddy's son, and he couldn't ignore his father who always thought of him. That warm smile made Muyu's heart feel like it was being stabbed by a knife. Muyu reached out to touch Deadwood's body, but his hand went straight through Deadwood's body. Deadwood Daddy's formation skills were superb, and this was just an image that he left behind using a formation. It wasn't the real him. I don't know if you will admit that I am your Deadwood Daddy, but I have long treated you as my son. You can laugh at me as much as you want. Now I can't deal with you, but I just want to take advantage of you, just like that old fart took advantage of me. I now treat myself as your father. If you don't want to, then grit your teeth and go. Deadwood Daddy stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Muyu quietly. His smile was very sincere, without any pretense. He didn't know if it was the shameless behavior of the old man guarding the pavilion in front of the people of 100 Herb Hall that inspired him, but he also wanted to do the same to Muyu. Dad, I let you down. I won't grit my teeth, nor will I laugh at you. I have always treated you as my father. Muyu smiled weakly. He felt a burst of sadness, as if someone was grabbing his heart with their hand, making him feel very uncomfortable. Someone is chasing me. I guess it's a severed soul stage cultivator. Everyone has always looked down on me. You also think that my cultivation base is only at the Jindan period and I need your protection everywhere. Now I will let you see, as an array master, how to kill a severed soul stage cultivator. What I want to tell you is that your Deadwood Daddy is not so useless. I don't need your protection. Deadwood waved his hand, and a magnificent scene suddenly appeared in front of Muyu. Muyu was shocked to see that the Jindan period Deadwood Daddy used the transformation pill to integrate into the array and instantly became an out-of-body stage cultivator. Then he used the array to integrate the 5 explosive pills refined by the old man guarding the pavilion into the array, which was almost enough to kill the severed soul stage cultivator. The use of Deadwood array formation was far beyond Muyu's imagination. However, a white light flew out of the woods and hit Deadwood, who was concentrating, causing Deadwood to be directly hit by the array and fall down in an instant. The white light was so eye-catching and holy, but it made Muyu clench his fists involuntarily. The white light that attacked Deadwood was exactly the same as the light that Muyu saw on the law enforcers. It was soul power. On the side, Deadwood's face showed a complacent look. How is it? Did I get rid of the severed soul stage bastard? I said, I'm not so easy to provoke. Are you envious of my array formation? It's a pity that you can only watch me show my power, and you can't do anything. That bastard Feng Haochen doesn't allow you to learn array formation, so your envy is useless. When Deadwood left the valley, he engraved this image in advance. He thought that it was more than enough to set up a trap to kill a severed soul stage cultivator. He didn't expect to be attacked by the 3 palaces, so at this moment, Deadwood really thought that he had killed the severed soul stage cultivator. Yes, Dad, you defeated the severed soul stage cultivator. You are the hero in my heart, Muyu said with a sad smile. Deadwood didn't hear what Muyu said at all. He put away his smile and said seriously, but it's useless for me to kill the severed soul stage cultivator. I know that I will be killed by the 3 palaces. The guardian of the 3 palaces won't let me live. There are some things that Feng Haochen didn't tell you, but I feel like you need to know. Deadwood's expression was very serious. When I felt my source spirit force being used, I knew that I would be killed by the guardian of the 3 palaces. The 3 palaces won't let your master recover so easily. You don't know much about arrays, so you don't understand what it means to set up a heaven and earth array. When setting up this array, the person who set up the array sealed their source spirit force in the heaven and earth array to control the immortal trapping prison. The immortal trapping prison wasn't set up by Feng Haochen alone, but by the power of 6 people. Other than Feng Haochen, the other 5 are Xie Bulo, Phantom Qingyu, Formation Heavenly Dao, the guardian of the 3 palaces, and the last one is me. Muyu frowned. Gomang had said similar things to him. He didn't expect the immortal trapping prison to be built by several people. I feel like you're curling your lips again. Anyway, believe it or not, this is the truth. Your dad has the ability to do this. Kumu snorted complacently. In short, Feng Haochen is the core controller of the immortal confining prison, but our original spiritual power is sealed in the immortal confining prison, so we can use our own formation techniques to coordinate this formation. I don't know how the guardian of the 3rd palace got my source spirit energy, but I can tell you responsibly that once he gets the source spirit energy I left behind in the immortal confining prison and kills me, his control over the immortal confining prison will increase by a bit. If he gets another person's source spirit force and kills that person, then his control over the immortal trapping prison will be equal to Feng Haochun's. Mu Yu clenched his fists. So the guardian of the three palaces killed Deadwood Daddy. Because of this, Feng Haochun will use the life force of the underworld grass to recover after a year. But if the three palaces control more than half of the immortal trapping prison, then Feng Haochun will be in danger. Therefore, Xie Bulo, Phantom Qingyu, and Formation Heavenly Tao can't be harmed like me. Phantom Qingyu's whereabouts are unpredictable, so I don't know his situation. Xie Bulo is very strong, so the three palaces won't provoke him. However, Formation Heavenly Tao is the same as me. He is an immortal, although he has methods to protect himself, and the three palaces aren't confident in dealing with him. His lifespan will eventually come to an end. Moreover, the guardian of the three palaces will definitely find a chance to kill Formation Heavenly Tao, so he should be the guardian's next target. Before Dead Tree's cultivation dissipated, his array techniques were enough to make the third palace's array guardian wary. Thus, the third palace's array guardian didn't do anything to Dead Tree until the underworld grass appeared. Thus, the third palace's array guardian decided to kill Dead Tree. Formation Heavenly Tao is the ancestor of the array sect. Although he is an immortal, he is very old. I don't know his current situation, but you should try your best to go to the array sect. As long as Formation Heavenly Tao doesn't die within a year, nothing will happen to that bastard Feng Haochun. As for whether you want to learn array techniques, it's up to you. I've given you the Xian array, which is the essence of my array techniques. However, the basic array techniques aren't recorded, so it will be a bit difficult for you to learn. If you want to learn, you can go to the array sect to learn some basic knowledge about array techniques, then learn the Xian array. The Dead Tree seemed to have already anticipated Mu Yu's plan. He was able to explain everything clearly in a hurry, and even used a powerful array to record such information. He was indeed worthy of his reputation as the strongest array master among the 6 array masters of the 3 continents. A trace of worry appeared on Deadwood's face. If you see this, then something must have happened to me. I'm worried that you will recklessly seek revenge from the 3 palaces because of this. I'm also worried that you will never be able to recover from this setback. After I die, don't think about reviving me in the blink of an eye. Compared to my life, your safety is more important. Do you understand? Mu Yu shook his head and murmured, Dad, you're wrong. In my eyes, your life is more important than anything else. You're the one who deserves to live the most. I will find a way to lift the 9th heaven sealing demon formation and revive you. I swear. However, the Deadwood in front of him was only an image left by the formation. He couldn't hear what Mu Yu was saying. Deadwood continued, After saying this, I'm going to run for my life. I'm going to record the scene of killing the severed soul stage pursuers. I'm waiting for you to be shocked. I like your optimistic character because your optimism adds a lot of color to my life. Don't become a different person because of my death. I won't forgive you. I hope you will always be an optimistic child, and I hope you are really my son. I really want to hear you call me Deadwood Daddy. That way, I can die without regrets. AI. After Deadwood said this, he shook his head bitterly. This image was engraved before Tian Bue chased him to the valley. When he engraved this image, he didn't know whether Mu Yu regarded him as his father or not. In his opinion, everything was his wishful thinking. But he knew that his life was coming to an end. He didn't want to leave any regrets. He must say what was in his heart. Mu Yu clenched his fists. Dad, I will be an optimistic child and always be optimistic. But I will definitely kill Tian Bue and destroy the Sanchong Palace. The most important thing is that I will revive you in the blink of an eye. Wait for me. Deadwood seemed to think of something and continued. By the way, I set up a soul-fixing formation in the blood jade ink crystal before. That is another way I invented to save Feng Haochun. If Feng Haochun's eternal life constitution is taken away one day, you can try to use the soul-fixing formation to save Feng Haochun's soul. As long as Feng Haochun's soul is not destroyed, he can continue to live with his ability. I hope this soul-fixing formation won't be used. In the future, you can give the blood jade ink crystal to Feng Haochun and let it be prepared. He must be alive to deal with the Sanchong Palace and save Miao Yuyan. The soul-fixing formation can also be used on Miao Yuyin in the future. Yuyin's life will eventually come to an end. The soul-fixing formation can suppress her soul and prevent it from dissipating. This way, she can be together forever. Deadwood pursed his lips and then closed his eyes in pain. He took a deep breath and sighed. Maybe Miao Yuyin can be together with the person she likes forever. He loved her and sacrificed everything for her. He still had to consider her happiness. Deadwood liked Miao Yuyin. For the sake of Miao Yuyin's happiness, he chose to withdraw and save his love rival. He chose to let Miao Yuyin be together with Feng Haochen forever. But he didn't get anything. Even his wish to go back and live with Lung Bingxue forever was shattered. That's all I want to say. You have to protect yourself. Daddy won't be able to help you anymore. Deadwood looked at the sky and sighed. Then, his figure gradually disappeared. At that time, Deadwood already knew that his life was coming to an end. But he wasn't thinking about how to escape. Instead, he was thinking about how to persuade Mu Yu not to do anything stupid. He was also thinking about how to perform in front of the sun in his heart. Deadwood Daddy, you shouldn't always live for others. I want you to live for yourself for once. Mu Yu lowered his head. His heart was filled with sorrow. He firmly grasped the fist-sized blood jade ink crystal and transferred his spiritual power into the blood jade ink crystal again. The small blood jade ink crystal was engraved with countless array patterns. His spiritual power flowed among the array patterns, and he finally found the soul-stabilizing array that Deadwood's father had mentioned. Mu Yu channeled his spiritual energy into the soul-fixing formation. The soul-fixing formation suddenly emitted a series of bright lights. Mu Yu could see the situation inside the formation. Mu Yu's heart trembled. It was as if it missed a beat. Chapter 365. The person in the soul-stabilizing array formation looked so peaceful, as if he was sleeping, but Mu Yu's shriveled heart suddenly felt as if it was stuffed with air. Deadwood Daddy. Mu Yu stared at the illusory figure in a daze. However, he wasn't sure because he didn't know if this was still Deadwood Daddy's illusion. However, he was very familiar with life force. He could clearly feel that the Deadwood Daddy in the soul anchoring formation wasn't an illusion, but a real soul. It was Deadwood Daddy's soul. However, Deadwood Daddy's eyes were tightly closed, and he didn't have any consciousness. His soul was a little unstable and could dissipate at any time. Without the help of the soul anchoring formation, his soul could very well shatter. Mu Yu didn't dare to touch the soul anchoring formation. He didn't know how the formation worked, and he was afraid that it would lose its effect if he lost control. Mu Yu, we're back. Little Shuai jumped up and down while holding a few chicken drumsticks and happily gnawing on them. Xiao Shui also landed beside Mu Yu. Little Shuai, help me take a look. Deadwood Daddy's condition. Mu Yu anxiously pulled Little Shuai's tail and handed the blood jade ink crystal to Little Shuai. What did you just say about Deadwood Daddy? Mu Yu, didn't that Deadwood Daddy pass away? Little Shuai's chicken drumstick was snatched away by Mu Yu, but he wasn't angry this time. Instead, he asked hesitantly, Soul anchoring formation, Soul, Little Shuai, quickly take a look and see if Deadwood Daddy can still be saved. Mu Yu said anxiously. Xiao Shui worriedly placed her hand on Mu Yu's shoulder. She thought that Mu Yu was hallucinating because of his excessive grief. However, Mu Yu quickly explained the blood jade ink crystal. Both Xiao Shui and Little Shuai were skeptical. Little Shuai took the blood jade ink crystal and found the soul anchoring formation according to Mu Yu's instructions. The moment Little Shuai saw Deadwood, he was also surprised. How is it? Is Pops okay? Mu Yu asked nervously. Only Little Shuai knew about life and death. What a powerful formation to be able to forcibly hold the soul in place. This is much more advanced than the method used by the Gate of Hell. Xiao Shui said in surprise. Then he frowned. But his soul is damaged. I'm afraid it won't be easy for him to recover. The power of the Heaven's Enforcer is very strange. That kind of power is very harmful to the soul. Deadwood Daddy's soul has no consciousness right now. I'm afraid that the Triple Palace's Enforcer's white light injured him. The power of the Enforcers was the hated soul power. It was a power that came from the dead. Then, can Pops be saved? Muyu asked anxiously. Little Shuai said, I don't know if he can be saved or not. The current situation might be because Deadwood Daddy's soul was accidentally pulled in by the soul anchoring formation after his death. However, there are some cracks on his soul's chest. Those were caused by the enforcers. I think that as long as those cracks are repaired, his soul should be able to regain consciousness. Muyu asked in surprise, Is there any way to repair the cracks on the soul? Little Shuai scratched his head and said in a daze, I'm not sure. When I met the people from the Gate of Hell, I discovered that their cultivation technique allowed them to revive after death. Maybe they have some way to repair the soul. The Gate of Hell. Muyu clenched his fists. He didn't like the Gate of Hell, but if the Gate of Hell could save his pops, he would think of a way to go to the Gate of Hell to find a way to repair the cracks on his soul. Xiao Shue's expression changed slightly. The vicious methods of the Hell Gate when she was in the second celestial layer were still fresh in her mind. She still could not forget the tragic deaths of the demon clansmen who entered the second celestial layer with her. Muyu, are you really planning to go to the Gate of Hell to find a way to heal Deadwood? Xiao Shui asked hesitantly. Little Shuai pondered for a while and said, There's no rush to go to the Gate of Hell. This soul anchoring formation is too complicated. It can protect Pop's soul from dissipating, and it can also allow his soul to live forever in this formation. I think that he can leave this formation for a short period of time after he wakes up. I don't know the specifics. However, all formations need to be maintained. If you don't understand this formation, then it's very likely that the formation won't be able to maintain itself if there's a problem with one of the patterns. Muyu was startled. He had only learned the basics of formations. The soul anchoring formation was a top-notch formation. It was far beyond his understanding, and he didn't have the ability to maintain it. If he wanted to protect Deadwood Daddy's soul, he had to learn the Xian formation. Deadwood Daddy originally created the soul anchoring formation for Miao Yi's sake, but he never expected that this formation would save him by a stroke of luck. I understand. I have to make a trip to the formation sect. Muyu stood up with a resolute expression. Deadwood Daddy let him choose whether to learn the formation or not. Muyu's answer was self-evident. The Xian formation that Deadwood Daddy left behind was too profound. Muyu had to learn the basics of formations before he could learn the Xian formation. Deadwood Daddy suggested that he go to the formation sect to learn the basics of formations, so he had to go to the formation sect. Not to mention the fact that the guardian of the threefold palace might have set his sights on the founder of the formation sect, Formation Tiandao. If Formation Tiandao died at the hands of the guardian of the threefold palace, then the immortal confining prison would be in danger. I'll go with you, Xiao Shui said. Muyu shook his head. No, I have to enter the formation sect as a new disciple to learn the formation. If I go find Formation Tiandao now, he might not see me or believe me. However, if I become a member of the formation sect, I just need to find a way to get him to agree to help me. He didn't know if Formation Tiandao knew about the scheme of the threefold palace. In fact, even Deadwood Daddy didn't know that the threefold palace was the mastermind behind the war between the humans and Yumon. Deadwood Daddy only knew that the guardian of the threefold palace was after Feng Haochen's immortal body. Now that the cultivation realm followed the lead of the threefold palace, Formation Tiandao was the founder of the formation sect. Even if he knew the truth, he wouldn't dare to openly go against the threefold palace for his own sect. Therefore, Muyu couldn't go find Formation Tiandao directly. He could only go to the formation sect to gather information and learn the basics of formations. He had 2 formation grandmasters as his masters, but he didn't learn the essence of formations. Deadwood always said that Muyu would embarrass him, a formation grandmaster, if he went out. In the past, Muyu didn't care, but this time he was serious about learning formations. In order to save Deadwood, he didn't want to embarrass him. Xiao Shui glanced at Muyu and nodded. Then be careful. I have to go back to the demon race. A month ago, Xiao Shui received news from the demon race telling her to hurry back. However, she kept delaying and stayed to accompany Muyu. In her opinion, Muyu's matter was the most important. Muyu looked at Xiao Shui. With Xiao Shui's company these days, he didn't feel lonely and his mood was better. He hesitated for a moment before hugging Xiao Shui and whispering in her ear, "Thank you." Xiao Shui's face suddenly turned red. She pushed Muyu away and shook her head. "No need to thank me. If it was Tian Ran, she would have done the same." Muyu pursed his lips. He didn't feel good about it. Ever since the last time they parted, he hadn't seen Tian Ran again, but Xiao Shui suddenly walked into his heart, making him panic. Xiao Shui was a kind girl. She didn't want to ruin other people's relationships. "I know you're not a rash person, so I believe you won't do anything rash. Little Handsome, you have to be good. The two of you have to be good, understand?" Xiao Shui patted Little Handsome's head. Little Handsome was very cute and shamelessly liked to rub against girls' chests. He was a girl killer, and every girl liked him. "Okay, big sister Xiao Shui." Little Handsome wagged his tail. Muyu looked at Xiao Shui, and Xiao Shui looked at him. The two of them stared at each other. Then, Xiao Shui revealed a brilliant smile and left the cliff. Seeing Xiao Shui's figure gradually disappear into the horizon, Muyu came back to his senses. After being silent for so long, it was time to do something. He took out his shadow clone sword. He had already discovered that senior brother Qingyan had left an insignificant piece of iron on the hilt of his shadow clone sword. That was the thing that allowed senior brother Qingyan to sense his location. On this trip, it was time for him to learn to grow up. He didn't want to always rely on Qingyan and Luo Shang's help. He removed the piece of iron and then soared into the sky with Little Handsome. In the 50-kilometer garden in the south, Tian Bue and Tian Yun were sitting face to face in an elegant pavilion. Tian Bue had a scholarly appearance, and his every movement gave off the feeling of a weak scholar. No one would associate this young man with a vicious and merciless person. "Big brother, when will he come and find you?" Tian Yun's right leg had already been reattached. Heaven does not wait slowly took a sip of tea and said gently, "He will come and find me." Tian Yun angrily stomped his right leg and cursed. "Even someone else's leg isn't as good as my own. F***CK. This Muyu must die. Who cares if he's the disciple of a true god? I heard that a true god is already a piece of trash. Even if we kill him, a true god won't be able to take revenge. Besides, with the protection of the 3-layered palaces, even a true god won't dare to offend you. Otherwise, he'll be the next Deadwood Evergreen." Tian Yun's right leg had been crippled by Muyu in the past, and he was permanently disabled. After all, he was a young gate master of the Stargate. It wouldn't be right if he lost an arm or a leg. As such, they went to great lengths to reattach his leg with intermittent grass. This wasn't because they were looking for intermittent grass. Instead, they were looking for a human leg that was completely compatible with Tian Yun's body. The people of the Stargate went to great lengths to find a suitable cultivator. Then, they chopped off that cultivator's right leg and reattached it to Tian Yun. He's a true god's disciple, not a true god. A true god still needs to be respected. The 3-layered palaces can't do anything to a true god. Tian Bue shook his head. Tian Yun snorted and didn't refute. Then, he said fiercely, "Brother, you must kill that Muyu." Tian Bue frowned and said, "If you really want to take revenge, you should rely on your own strength. When you go out, you'll be representing the face of the Stargate. Try not to do anything dishonorable." Tian Yun curled his lips in disdain and said, "Brother, the position of gate master in the future has nothing to do with me. I'll just be in charge of going out and being arrogant. You'll be in charge of strengthening the Stargate. In front of a fist, dishonorable is still honorable. Who dares to disagree?" Tian Bue shook his head and said, "Try to restrain yourself a little. Muyu will definitely come looking for me in the future. When that time comes, I'll capture him and you can kill him. But don't do it again. Why isn't he here yet? What a coward." Tian Yun snorted heavily. Tian Bue smiled and said, "I've indirectly killed his master, Deadwood Evergreen. He'll definitely come looking for me for revenge. But no matter when he comes, he won't be a match for me. When I kill a true God's disciple in front of everyone, it'll definitely be a huge event that will shake the entire cultivation world. Tian Yun looked at Tian Bui's gentle expression and suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He grew up under the halo of his big brother. He knew his big brother's methods better than anyone else. Chapter 366. In the cultivation world of the three continents, there were all kinds of strange techniques, like 100 flowers competing, each with its own merits. For example, the people of the Earth Emperor sect specialized in training powerful demon beasts to fight. The people of the Sword-Washing Valley had outstanding sword skills, and the strange twins of the Gate of Hell and the Gate of Life and Death. However, in the cultivation world, there were two special kinds of cultivators who were equivalent to extremes, and their strength and status were far from symmetrical. One kind was the alchemists led by the Danding sect, because alchemy would lead to the accumulation of wood residue in the body and slow down the body's reaction. Their overall cultivation was lower than ordinary cultivators. However, their status in the cultivation world was quite high because the elixirs they refined had a wide range of effects. Sometimes, being able to have a high-grade elixir was equivalent to giving an ordinary cultivator an extra life. Therefore, for many cultivators, making friends with an alchemist was something they could only come across by chance. A fifth-rank alchemist at the out-of-body stage was not even a spirit-severing stage cultivator dared to offend. The other kind of cultivator was the array master, led by the array sect. Array masters were proficient in arranging all kinds of wonderful arrays, and could also use arrays in battle. In the cultivation world, all cultivators understood one thing. When encountering an array master of the same level, they must retreat. If they did not have a strong defensive ability, they should not casually fight with them. Array masters had the strongest explosive power among all cultivators. Even if they were both at the fifth sky of out-of-body stage, an array master definitely had the ability to kill other cultivators in a second. However, the identity of an array master was the easiest to be despised in the cultivation world, because although array masters had strong explosive power and unstoppable lethality, their shortcomings were very obvious. When they used arrays, they needed to rely on various array bases with abundant spiritual energy. The higher the explosive power, the greater the reliance on the array base. Once the spiritual energy of the array base was exhausted, the array master would basically lose his combat power and would even become weaker than an alchemist. When an array master fought with others, he would end the battle quickly. If he could not defeat his opponent in a short time, his life would be in danger. Therefore, if most cultivators had a conflict with an array master, as long as they could withstand a round of fierce attacks from the array master, they could basically defeat the array master. Of course, if they could not withstand a round of attacks from the array master, they would be digging their own grave. Most people knew the shortcomings of array masters, and also knew that when fighting with array masters, they had to rely on nimble movement techniques to deal with them, trying their best to stall for time. Array masters were especially disliked in the cultivation world because they relied too much on array bases. Everyone more or less looked down on them. Therefore, although their battle prowess was high, they were far less respected than the alchemists. They were not like the alchemists, who could allow other cultivators to swallow a pill anytime and anywhere to save their lives. However, array masters were still quite important in the cultivation world. Many sects more or less used arrays. Whether it was used to protect the foundation of the sect or to protect precious treasures, arrays were indispensable. However, not every sect had a cultivator who was proficient in array formations. It was also impossible for a sect to spend time and effort to cultivate an array master. Therefore, whenever there was a problem with array formations, they would go to the array faction to invite an array master to help. It could be said that although array masters were occasionally looked down upon by others, many sects would still receive array masters very politely. This was because array masters were like alchemists. Their main purpose was not to fight. Array masters would set up arrays for many sects, cities, families, and other forces in the cultivation world to protect their own territory or to make things more convenient. There were two sects on the third continent that specialized in array formations. One was the array faction, which set up traditional arrays. They were called array masters. The other was the talisman grandmaster, which engraved arrays on talisman paper and then used the talisman paper to cast spells. They were called talisman masters. However, the people of the talisman grandmaster liked to call these spells talisman techniques, which was different from array techniques. The spells of the two sects were essentially the same. However, in the cultivation world, array masters were the mainstream. Talisman masters were not as famous as array masters. The array faction was located in a remote foggy valley on the third continent. This valley was vast and boundless. It was covered by a thick fog all year round. Even flying in the air would cause one to get lost. Without the guidance of the disciples of the array faction, outsiders would definitely not be able to enter the valley. Even the most powerful cultivator knew that this was not a holy land for sightseeing. It was easy for the array faction to accept disciples. There was an array door at the entrance of the foggy valley. There were 8 trigrams in the array. If one could decipher 3 trigrams, they would become a new disciple of the array faction. Those who entered the array door had to be approved by the array door. The array door would then judge if you were qualified to become an array master. If one overestimated their abilities, it would be easy for them to get lost in the array. Therefore, the array door only allowed those who were fated with the array to pass. The disciples of the array faction were divided into 3 levels of talent: connate, middle, and postnatal. Postnatal had the lowest talent while connate had the highest. In the array door, those who could decipher 3 trigrams were postnatal disciples. Those who could decipher 4 and 5 trigrams were middle heaven disciples. Those who could decipher 6, 7, and 8 trigrams were connate disciples. In the thousands of years of the array faction, there were very few connate disciples. This meant that they had already deciphered at least 6 trigrams when they entered the sect. After being nurtured, these connate disciples would undoubtedly become the pillars of the array faction. Up till now, it was said that the only person who could decipher all 8 trigrams was a genius of the array faction. He was also the only living ancestor of the array faction, Array Tiandao. The array faction had 2 disciples guarding the array door every day. If someone succeeded in breaking through the array, they would know. It was a hot and humid afternoon. 2 disciples of the Misty Valley were yawning in boredom. Every day, when it was their turn to be on duty, it meant that they could not cultivate. They could only obediently guard the array. It's been 3 months since anyone came to break through the array, right? Zhanbing was one of the disciples guarding the array faction today. The ones on duty were all postnatal disciples. Middle heaven and connate disciples would not come here to do this kind of work. So what if he did? Our array faction hasn't recruited a Zhongtian disciple for a year now. As for Xiantian disciples, we haven't even seen one in 10 years. Those Xiantian array masters are all anxious. I heard that array master Lu brought back a very talented Zhongtian disciple from outside last month and was rewarded by the sect master. The other postnatal disciple was called Fanwen. When he talked about middle heaven disciples, his face showed unconcealable envy. If a connate disciple appeared, it would definitely cause a stir in the entire array faction. Think about it. Our array faction only has 1 connate disciple, senior brother Mu Changhong. Zhanbing said, "AI, connate disciples are really enviable." Fanwen said with a face full of reverence. Middle heaven disciples were much more talented than Hotian disciples. They would receive great nurturing from the sect, and were the backbone of the array faction. As for connate disciples, there was no need to mention them. They were the pillars of the array faction, and the sect's resources would all be given to them. However, those who could become connate disciples were few and far between. Even the array faction only had 1 connate disciple in the last 10 years. Connate disciples were like rare treasures. If a second connate disciple appeared, the sect would spare no expense to nurture him. Wong. Suddenly, a fluctuation came from the array gate, attracting the attention of the 2. It was a young man around 18 or 19 years old. His face was white and clean, and he looked very ordinary. However, there was an indescribable sense of oppression between his eyebrows. This fellow wants to break through the 8 trigrams. Jean Bing frowned and exchanged a glance with Fan One. This fellow is only at the foundation establishment stage. He looks to be around 20 years old. Does our sect recruit disciples at such an age? Fan One asked. Jean Bing shook his head. Our principle for accepting disciples is that they are not older than 20 years old. He should meet the requirements, but he is still too old. Moreover, his cultivation is so low that he is not suitable for training. Most of the new disciples of the Array faction were younger than 16 years old when they first entered the sect. Youth was a kind of capital. The younger one was, the more beneficial it was to learn array formations. However, the disciples of the Array faction were also cultivators. Not only did they have to learn array formations, but they also had to cultivate their spiritual power. This young man was so old and had no cultivation. It meant that he would spend most of his energy on cultivation. This was not worth it. I'll go remind him. Fan Wen's figure had already disappeared and appeared beside the array gate. Muyi was looking at the array gate in a daze. Before he came, he had already asked someone about the general situation of the Array faction and knew the conditions for recruiting disciples. He was not completely ignorant about array formations. After all, he had more or less learned from Dead Tree. He knew a lot, but compared to Dead Tree, it was only a drop in the ocean. At this moment, Muyu had changed his appearance and suppressed his cultivation to the foundation establishment stage to avoid arousing too much suspicion. He looked at the array gate and was wondering why there was no one guarding it when a voice came from the side of the array gate. Hey kid, we don't accept disciples who are too old. Fan Wen said lazily. I heard that the Array faction only recruits disciples under the age of 20. I'm only 19 years old, so I meet the requirements. Muyu said calmly. He deliberately suppressed his aura and cultivation. After all, he was now the disciple of a famous, true god in the cultivation world. Once he was discovered by the people of the Array faction, they would definitely not let Muyu enter the Array faction. If this place was targeted by the people of the Third Palace, he might be exposed to the Third Palace's vision. Fan Wen snorted and looked up and down at Muyu. He said arrogantly, You are too old and your cultivation is too low. Even if you become a disciple of our Array faction, you won't achieve much. Hurry up and go back. Muyu frowned and said, How do you know if you don't try? Besides, did the elders of the Array faction ask you to stop me? Fan Wen was put on a bad name, and his face was a little unhappy. He reprimanded, You're overestimating yourself. With your talent, I'm afraid you can't even pass the first trigram. If you don't pass the third trigram, our Array faction won't accept you. Since I meet the requirements, and no elder of the Array faction asked you to do so, then I am qualified to enter. Muyu glanced at Fan Wen and walked into the array gate. Hello, you remember this? Fan Wen said angrily. Then he looked at Muyu's figure in a bad mood and returned to Jean Bing's side. What, did you lose? Jean Bing laughed. When he becomes a Hotian disciple in the future, I will definitely teach him a lesson. Fan Wen snorted coldly. Jean Bing shook his head. He knew that Fan Wen was a very petty person, but he still advised, don't provoke him first. What if he's a Zhongtian disciple or a Xiantian disciple? At that time, I'm afraid he will find trouble with you. Fan Wen showed a mocking look. He will become a Xiantian disciple? Don't be an idiot. He is so old and his cultivation is so low. It is impossible for him to become a Zhongtian disciple. Chapter 367. The formation door didn't stop him. At least he knew some formation techniques and wouldn't appear to be overestimating himself. The moment he stepped into the formation, all the scenery began to rotate, changing into another scene. A soft white light surrounded him, wrapping him in it. 8 ancient wooden doors appeared around him, looking as steady as a mountain. All the wooden doors suddenly opened together, revealing 8 exits. Each exit was suffused with different colors of light, and they were respectively written with the words open, rest, life, death, surprise, pain, end, and view. There was a passage behind these 8 words, but he didn't know where it led. Open one door in the order of ominous, medium, and auspicious, and you can pass a hexagram. Your choice has a lot to do with the following test, so please choose carefully. An old voice slowly resounded in the surroundings. At the same time, 8 identical wooden doors slammed shut with a bang, producing a thick echo. Then, all the wooden doors began to rapidly change positions, dazzling the eyes of the onlookers. Then the wooden doors fell heavily to the ground. Engraved lines extended from the bottom of the 8 wooden doors, outlining a huge 8 trigrams on the ground, and Muyu was standing on the 8 trigrams yin-yang fish. Solving a hexagram was actually very simple. As long as you had a general understanding of the 8 trigrams, it was basically easy to pass. Among the 8 doors, open, rest, and life belonged to the auspicious, death, surprise, and injury belonged to the ominous, and end in view belonged to the medium. According to the requirements, he only needed to open one door in the order of ominous, medium, and auspicious. Next was to determine the positions of the 8 doors. Open door was in the northwest Qian Palace. Rest door was in the North Qin Palace. Life door belonged to the Earth door. East door belonged to the Jin Palace. East door belonged to the Jin Palace. East door belonged to the Sun Palace. South door belonged to the Li Palace. Death door belonged to the Middle door. Southwest Koan Palace. And Surprise door belonged to the West door. Every position of the 8 trigrams had different engravings. According to these engravings, the position was determined. So this was a simple reasoning process. Isn't it too easy to solve a hexagram? Back in the valley, when Deadwood forced us to learn about the 8 trigrams, he used 8 different kinds of fierce monsters to guard the door. Little Shuai curled his lips in Muyu's chest. Little rat, will you die if you don't mention the dead tree? The dragon vine wrapped around Muyu's arm and scolded in a low voice. Little Shuai realized that he had said something that he shouldn't have. He stole a glance at Muyu and realized that there was a hint of sadness in Muyu's eyes. He seemed to have recalled the time when he was forced to learn Xian formations by Kumu. However, he quickly covered it up because he knew that there was still a chance for the dead tree to come back to life. It's just a slip of the tongue. It's not like I did it on purpose. Besides, this hexagram test is just child's play. Little Shuai muttered, and the big earthworm. I remember that you were almost swallowed by a water snake. You're a dragon vine. How embarrassing. F*CK. Wasn't my aura sealed by the dead tree at that time? Dragon vine said angrily. Big earthworm. I told you not to mention the word withered tree, yet you still brought it up. Little handsome scolded. Weren't you the one who brought it up first? Dragon vine's voice weakened. Muyu took a deep breath. He remembered that he was not familiar with formations and was running around randomly. He stepped into the death gate with his first step and was almost swallowed by the most ferocious flood dragon. The water snake that Little Shuai mentioned was the flood dragon. The flood dragon did not have the dragon shape like dragon vine, nor did it have the aura of a dragon. However, it was a 5th-rank demonic beast at that time, and its strength was much stronger than Muyu, who was still in the nascent soul stage at that time. For this reason, the dead tree even cursed and saved Muyu. Then, it hung him upside down above the valley for an entire day as a punishment for not studying properly. Now that the person who always liked to make things difficult for Muyu was no longer around, Muyu felt a wave of melancholy in his heart. I plan to choose the life gate, the stop gate, and the death gate. My ability always seems to be inseparable from life and death, Muyu said softly. Little Shuai and Dragon Vine did not speak. They did not care. Anyway, they did not need to do anything to break through the formation. They only needed to move their mouths. Muyu followed the direction of the 8 trigrams on the ground and opened the 3 gates respectively. Then, he returned to the yin-yang fish. At this time, the other 5 gates around him gradually turned into formation patterns and integrated into the 8 trigrams on the ground. The 3 gates that Muyu opened merged into one again. Then, the gates slowly opened, revealing a dark passage. Muyu hesitated for a moment and stepped into the passage. The passage was surrounded by stone walls. Moss grew between the cracks of the stone, and it was also a little damp. Every time he walked a distance, a candle would appear in the air, as if it was held by an invisible hand. The candle emitted a pale light and only illuminated a little bit of the passage. The passage was not long. Muyu soon reached the other end of the passage. He opened a gate and stepped into the second 8 trigrams. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him because he realized that he was on a prairie. Bees and butterflies danced on the prairie. The grass was long and the orioles were flying. However, what was strange was that the sky he saw when he looked up was also a prairie. He realized that the scene in the sky was exactly the same as the scene on the ground he was standing on. It was as if someone had installed a super large mirror on the ceiling. Even the movements of the butterflies and bees were quite similar. They were just diametrically opposite. Not far away, there was a mountain peak. In the sky, there was also an inverted mountain peak. The peaks of the 2 mountains were pressed against each other. However, there was no reflection of Muyu on the prairie in the sky. What's going on? Little Shuai poked his head out and looked around. Is there a mirror above us? Little Mouse, if there's a mirror above us, why can't it reflect you? Dragon Vine said, none of your business. I'm too handsome. Can it reflect me? Little Shuai curled his lips. Muyu stepped on the flying sword and slowly rose into the air. He used his hand to touch the top of his head. He also believed that there should be a mirror above him. However, after flying for about 10 meters, he still couldn't touch the edge. He continued to fly upwards. After flying for about 100 meters, he suddenly felt his center of gravity reverse. Following that, he fell towards the prairie above him. He adjusted his body in time and stood on the ground. Above him was still a prairie. Did we come to the prairie on the ceiling? Little Shuai asked curiously. There's a way to verify it. Little Shuai, fly up, Muyu said. Little Shuai jumped out of Muyu's arms and flew towards the sky. He was very fast, but at this moment his center of gravity reversed. Without stopping in time, he slammed into the grass with a plop. Ouch, it hurts. Little Shuai spat out the soil in his mouth and stood on the grass. He looked around in dissatisfaction. Then he looked up and was surprised to see Muyu on the prairie above him, looking at him upside down. This is an inverted world. Muyu understood that a strange array formation had been set up here. It used a certain place in the sky as the boundary, and then turned the 2 worlds upside down. There was no concept of sky or ground here. No matter which prairie you stood on, the other prairie became your sky. Then how do we pass the second hexagram? There's no newbie hint. Little Shuai flew towards Muyu again. This time, he learned his lesson and flew slower. Indeed, after flying past a certain height, his center of gravity changed from below to above. He no longer needed to fly as he fell to another prairie. Muyu simply lay on the prairie and looked at the inverted prairie above him. He touched the grass on the ground and nodded thoughtfully. Then, he said indifferently, I know what this hexagram wants us to do. Do what? Little Shuai asked, puzzled. This is an inverted array formation, also known as a mirror array formation. Other than us outsiders, the prairie we're lying on and the prairie above us are all the same. If you want to break this mirror array formation, you have to find the difference. Muyu scanned the prairie in the sky as if he was searching for something. He saw 2 peaks in the distance that touched each other and knew that this peak was the passage that connected the prairie. He remembered that when he was still in the Jindan period, he accidentally entered the Withered Tree Valley and was trapped by a mirror array formation. At that time, no matter which path he took, he would be teleported back to the starting point when he reached the dividing line. At that time, he had to find the dividing line to break the array formation. However, the dividing line of this array formation was already very obvious. It was completely different from the mirror array formation set up by the withered tree. Find the difference? I'm good at such a fun game. Little Shuai wagged his tail and got up. He began to look up and down to find the difference between the 2 prairies. Unfortunately, this prairie was too big. Little Shuai looked for a long time and found nothing different. Even the flight path of the butterfly was the same. Damn it, I'm not looking anymore. I'm going to have cervical spondylosis. Little Shuai cursed. He turned his head and saw that Muyu was still lying there, motionless. "Hey, don't be lazy," little Shuai said unhappily. Muyu seemed to be thinking about something and said, "There's no need to look anymore. The two prairies are exactly the same. The only difference is under our feet." Under our feet? Little Shuai was confused. He had been flying in the air all this time. We stepped on a blade of grass, and it caused the two prairies to be different. So, if you want to find the difference, you don't have to look anywhere. Just look under your feet. Muyu sat up and wanted to pull out a blade of grass. However, this blade of grass did not move and could not be damaged at all. He was not discouraged. He pressed down the blade of grass with his hand and then nodded slightly. "Little Shuai, don't you find anything wrong with the spirit energy on the ground?" Little Shuai landed on the ground and then touched the ground. Suddenly, he understood. The spirit energy in the place we step on will automatically move away. Little Shuai hopped a few more steps and found that it was as if he was stepping on calm water. Every step he took would leave small ripples of spirit energy. If we didn't step on the prairie above, its spirit energy would not fluctuate. This is the difference between the two prairies. Muyu had to admit that this was a very magical formation. It tested a person's perception. Many people would think of looking for the difference when they came in and found that the two prairies were exactly the same. However, many people would not be able to find the difference even if they searched the entire prairie. In fact, the real difference was under their feet. It was just that they were used to ignoring it. Since we know what's different, what should we do next? Although little Shuai knew a lot of things, he did not know much about formations. Now that we know what's different, of course we have to find a way to make this place exactly the same. Muyu gestured for little Shuai to leave the ground. Then he leaped into the air and waved the shadow clone sword, stabbing into the ground. He flew into the sky, and after flipping upside down again, he came to another prairie. He said, "Solving the second hexagram is actually to first create a difference. Then we just have to make up for this difference and make it the same." When the shadow clone sword stabbed into the ground, it caused the prairie above to change. Therefore, what Muyu needed to do was to make the other prairie undergo the same change. He pulled out another shadow clone sword and confirmed the position of the shadow clone sword above his head. Then he stabbed it into the same prairie below his feet. The two grasslands suddenly shook violently, and then the grassland above his head shattered like a mirror. Cracks appeared, and many pieces of grass began to fall down. Boom! The prairie above his head suddenly pressed down on the prairie where Muyu was. Chapter 368. How did he solve the second hexagram so quickly? Zhanbing looked at Muyu in disbelief. He remembered that it had taken him a full 7 days to figure out how to solve the second hexagram, and he had almost fainted from hunger. This array was maintained by a steady stream of spiritual energy, and if one looked carefully, they could find some hidden food in the grass. This food was prepared for the younger disciples and had no effect on the array at all. As long as one paid attention, they could even find dew on the grass to quench their thirst. It wasn't just Zhanbing. Everyone took different amounts of time to decipher the array formation. This mainly depended on one's perception and understanding of the array formation. The shorter the time it took to decipher the array formation, the higher one's perception was. Generally, a Hotian disciple would take at least 7 or 8 days and even a month or 2. A Zhongtian disciple would take at least 3 or 4 days. As for a Xiantian disciple, it was normal to take a day. But Muyu had taken less than 2 hours. Although Muyu hadn't learned any profound array formations, but when faced with many things, it was easy for him to calm down and think about how to break the array formations. This was related to the falling dust cultivation method that he cultivated. The falling dust cultivation method allowed him to eliminate the distracting thoughts in his mind. Moreover, Deadwood Daddy had told him that there was no perfect array in the world. There were bound to be some flaws, and as long as he could calculate the general situation of the array, he would be able to solve it. So when he faced the second hexagram, he didn't wander around like a headless fly like the others. Instead, he carefully thought about it, just like when he had solved the mirror array set up by Deadwood. I remember that the record holder for the second hexagram was senior apprentice brother Mu Chung-hong. He only took 4 hours to solve it, but this guy didn't even take 2 hours? Fanwen sucked in a breath of cold air. Mu Chung-hong was the publicly recognized #1 genius of the Array faction, and was also the only Xiantian disciple of the Array faction. 10 years ago, when he had just entered the sect, he had broken into the 7th hexagram. Unfortunately, he had failed at the 8th hexagram and had almost lost his life. It was a Xiantian Array master who had saved him, but this had caused a huge sensation in the Array faction. But the person in front of them seemed to have broken the record of the #1 genius. Don't be hasty. Senior Brother Mu is someone who passed through 7 trigrams. This newcomer is just lucky. How can he compare to Senior Brother Mu? Who knows, he might just end up dead, Zhan Bing said. The method to solve the first and second divinations seemed to be the same. Many people thought that if the disciples of the Array faction were to give them some pointers, it would not be a problem to pass. However, the Array door had already ensured that this kind of cheating was impossible. Even if the disciples of the Array faction told the person who wanted to enter the 8 trigrams that the second trigram was to look for something different and that it was right under their feet, this person would be forced to forget this method when passing through the Array door, leaving him to figure out on his own. In order to break through the formation, one had to rely on one's true strength and not fake it. Therefore, Zhan Bing and Fan Wen did not think that Mu Yu cheated. Instead, they thought that Mu Yu was lucky. Mu Yu stood where he was without moving. The grassland above his head shattered like a mirror, but when it smashed onto his body, it turned into even finer fragments of runes and disappeared. It did not cause him any harm. The surrounding scenery spun and changed again. All the grasslands disappeared, and Mu Yu's body suddenly floated up as though he had lost all gravity. What's going on? Mu Yu frowned and wanted to speak, but he found that no sound came out. The air suddenly fell into a dead silence. No sound could be heard, and no smell could be smelled. Xiao Shuai firmly grabbed onto his clothes and was climbing into his pocket. His mouth opened and closed as though he was cursing loudly. Mu Yu knew the shape of Xiao Shuai's mouth like the back of his hand. He knew that Xiao Shuai was complaining. Why am I floating? Do I have to go up into the sky again? This was also Mu Yu's question. His body was not restrained in any way. It was as though he was swimming in water, but he could not find a place to borrow strength. He could not swim at all and could only float aimlessly. The spirit power in his body seemed to be suppressed by something, making him unable to control himself at all. He was surrounded by a white fog. He floated in the fog and could no longer distinguish where the sky was and where the earth was. The fog gradually dissipated and darkness descended. However, there were dots of light in the darkness. They were densely packed, and more appeared. They seemed to be orderly, but were also chaotically distributed around Mu Yu's body. These dots of light looked like a sky full of stars. They were only the size of rice grains. Some of the stars were brighter, while others were dimmer. Mu Yu stretched out his hand and found that these stars were within his reach. He could move them, but after a while, these stars would automatically return to their positions. What was the 3rd hexagram for? Mu Yu looked at these stars carefully. The arrangement of each star looked familiar. Then he suddenly understood what these stars meant. Every night when he looked up at the sky, the stars in the sky were arranged like this. He looked around and finally saw the most familiar Big Dipper star formation not far away. He struggled to move towards the Big Dipper star formation. This was not easy because he could only move a little at a time. When he moved to the Big Dipper star formation, it felt like several hours had passed. But so what if he found the Big Dipper star formation? There was still no hint as to how to pass this hexagram. These constellations were scattered all around, and there was nothing special about them. The rice-sized dots of starlight were constantly shining, but they did not attack Mu Yu. He had never come into contact with constellation formations before, but Kumu had mentioned it to him before. Studying constellation formations was a huge field of knowledge. Different constellation formations had different abilities. Most of these constellation formations were used in battles. When the self-cultivators fought with the Yumeng devils, It was impossible for them to fight in a chaotic manner. Many almighty experts of the human race had studied the constellations in the sky and determined the positions of the self-cultivators according to the constellations in the sky. By turning the constellation formation in the sky into an offensive and defensive formation, it would produce unexpected results on the battlefield. Could this third hexagram be used to break the constellation formation? Just as he thought of this, the constellations around him suddenly changed. All the constellations changed their positions and began to rearrange themselves. Soon, all the stars were divided into two groups. One group was scattered around Muyu in a chaotic mess, while the other group gathered in front of him to form a mysterious constellation formation. This constellation formation looked like a long snake. The snake's head was triangular. Its body was constantly twisting and changing. It was very flexible. Muyu roughly estimated that there were at least hundreds of thousands of rice-sized stars forming this long snake. It was about 10 feet long, and in front of Muyu, it was like a huge monster. Do I have to use these stars around me to form something to fight against this long snake? Muyu thought to himself, but this was too exaggerated. There were tens of thousands of stars around him, not to mention that it was very difficult for him to move. If he were to arrange them one by one, he might not be able to form something as big as the long snake, even if he were to arrange them one by one for 100 years. However, the long snake suddenly spat out its tongue and then fiercely swung its tail at Muyu. Muyu wanted to escape, but his body did not listen to him and was directly swept away. He felt like his chest had been hit by a stick. It was extremely uncomfortable. This long snake formed by the constellations was actually for real. As the long snake spat out its tongue, it suddenly attacked Muyu again. This time, it actually opened its bloody mouth and bit at Muyu. This fellow's mouth was enough to bite off Muyu's head. Muyu struggled to twist away, and the snake's teeth bit his arm. A piercing pain assaulted him, and blood flowed out. This long snake formed by the stars was actually similar to a real long snake. Fortunately, the long snake did not seem to be poisonous. Otherwise, Muyu would definitely have started cursing. If these stars could be controlled by me, I would definitely make stick. See if I can't beat you to death. Muyu was also angry. His body was now restricted. Fighting against the long snake was completely one-sided, and he was the one being tortured. However, just as this thought formed, the stars around him actually formed a stick about the size of the long snake according to his will. He ruthlessly swung it at the long snake. So I can do it just by thinking about it? Muyu was somewhat surprised. If he had known that these stars could be controlled by his will, he wouldn't have let the long snake mess with him for nothing. The long stick missed the long snake. The long snake nimbly dodged, and at the same time, it quickly flicked its tail and sent the long stick flying. Snake hit 7 inches. Let me teach you a lesson. Muyu's mind stirred, and the long stick in the air transformed into a triangular fork, stabbing at the snake's 7 inches. However, the long snake's body suddenly curled up rapidly, wrapping around the triangular fork and viciously biting down. Holy shit! Muyu felt his chest tremble as 4 clear teeth marks appeared on his body. If the long stick was bitten, it would be equivalent to him being bitten. Under Muyu's control, the long stick turned into a pile of loose sand. It struggled free from the long snake's entanglement and quickly transformed into an eagle. The eagle flapped its wings and bared its sharp teeth to grab the long snake. However, the long snake was not to be outdone. It actually transformed into a large net, wanting to trap the eagle. Muyu hurriedly transformed the eagle into a gigantic sword and slashed down at the large net. The large net was split into 2 by Muyu's gigantic sword, but it quickly reassembled and transformed into a gigantic sword to confront Muyu. This won't do. All things reinforce and restrain each other. No matter what I transform my stars into, they will transform into something even more powerful to restrain me. If this continues, there will be no end to it. There must be some loophole that I've overlooked. Muyu carefully sized up the large sword in front of him, hoping to find something abnormal about it. The surrounding rice-sized stars were his weapons. He only needed to use his mind to transform these stars into anything. If he wanted to break the constellation array, he needed to use the stars he controlled to defeat his opponent. However, his opponent was also formed from stars, so it could always transform into something stronger to neutralize his attacks. Soon, he discovered that there was a gigantic star emitting red light at the hilt of his opponent's sword. This star was extremely dazzling and could be easily seen. Muyu remembered that the long snake was located at the 7-inch point of the snake's body, and when it transformed into a large net, this red star was located at one of the corners of the net. At this moment, the two swords in the air had already intertwined as they slashed with all their might. Whenever Muyu's sword hilt was struck by his opponent, he would grimace in pain. He wanted to use his sword to stab at his opponent's red star, but it would always be neutralized by his opponent. Competing with me in swords? You're simply displaying your slight skill in front of an expert. Muyu cursed inwardly. Following that, he realized that these words were a little strange. What did it mean to compete in wretchedness? It was too unpleasant to hear. Muyu's gigantic sword suddenly dispersed, transforming into 6 flying swords. Although they were smaller in size, they were even more nimble. Heavenly Sword 9 Guides was Muyu's specialty. His 6 swords were like dragons swimming in water in the air, using all kinds of tricky methods to sweep towards the gigantic sword. The gigantic sword began to appear flustered. It realized that it was unable to deal with so many flying swords at the same time, so it dispersed and transformed into a gigantic sphere. The sphere was inlaid layer by layer, wrapping the red star in the center. The entire sphere rapidly rolled, resisting the attacks of Muyu's flying swords with all its might. Muyu's flying sword stabbed at the rolling sphere, but the sphere actually neutralized the power of his swords by quite a bit. The 6 swords stabbed at the same time, but they were all bounced off without any mishaps. At this level, even if he could make his flying swords use Heavenly Sword 9 Guides, it was not something that Muyu could use himself, so it was still very awkward to use. Chapter 369. The 2 flying swords suddenly separated and transformed into sharp flying claws. There was a chain behind the flying claws. The sharp flying claws directly grabbed the sphere and pierced into it. Then, one end of the chain began to transform into a rod. It swung with force, throwing the sphere into the air like a meteor hammer. The sphere's rotation was interrupted, and the other 4 flying swords turned back into a sharp awl. Then, under Muyu's control, the claw swung the sphere towards the awl. The awl pierced into the sphere, and the sphere caved in like a deflated balloon. The sphere turned into a shield and blocked the awl's advance. It's my turn now. Muyu's eyes flashed, and the awl under his control began to spin, creating a powerful penetrating force that shattered the shield. Specks of starlight scattered in all directions, and Muyu immediately saw a conspicuous red star among the specks of starlight. The claw turned into darts and flew towards the red star. Many stars rushed in front of the red star to protect it, but they were all repelled by Muyu's darts. Muyu took advantage of an opening and finally let a dart pierce the red star. The red star wanted to escape, but the dart turned into a palm and held the red star firmly in its hand. After the red star was restrained, all the stars controlled by the red star seemed to have lost their backbone and began to run around like headless flies. Muyu's palm squeezed hard, and the red star was crushed. Then, cracks began to appear in the dark starry sky, and it turned into thousands of fragments that fell down. Muyu felt his body sink, and suddenly gravity returned. When he was weightless, he didn't know if he was standing or upside down, but once gravity returned, he knew his standing position. He was lying face down and didn't have time to adapt to the new gravity before he fell to the ground. Bastard, can't you be gentler? Muyu was so angry that his nose was almost crooked from the fall. While he was cursing, the disciples guarding the array widened their eyes. They didn't expect this inconspicuous guy to pass the 3rd hexagram so quickly. How long did you take to pass the 3rd hexagram? Jean Bing swallowed his saliva. In this trial, the stars controlled by the 8 trigrams didn't attack continuously. After attacking for 3 hours, it would stop, leaving 3 hours for the challenger to figure out how to deal with it. When a challenger was surrounded by the stars controlled by the array and lost consciousness, it was considered a failure. It was a pity that Muyu was not on the same level as the ordinary new disciples. Although he was only 19 years old, but he had experienced far more than the new disciples. Even in the second heavenly layer, which was filled with monster beasts everywhere, he was still restrained by this constellation array. That was just too unreasonable. I took a month. At that time, all the stars I control were surrounded, and I almost suffocated to death. What about you? Fanlin was also very surprised. Me too. He actually took less than 3 hours. Zhan Bing, Zhan Bing, Zhan Bing, Zhan Bings, Zhan Zhan Bing. The talents of the Zhongtian disciples were much better than the Hotian disciples. They were also the focus of the sect's training. The elders would pay more attention to the Zhongtian and Xiantian disciples. The Hotian disciples could only be regarded as shrimp soldiers and crab generals. Fanwin's face was very ugly because he also thought so. At first, he looked down on Muyu and even ridiculed him. But in the end, his method of breaking the array was so fast. But he didn't break the record of the 3rd hexagram. Unfortunately, senior brother Mu was half an hour faster than him. Fanwin pretended to be calm. But in fact, he knew that even if Muyu's speed was faster than Muyu's, Fanwin's speed was much faster than Fanwin's. Muyu got up and looked around again. At this moment, he had come to a room with only 3 doors. These 3 doors were the life door, death door, and stop door that he had chosen at the beginning. What does the 4th hexagram have to do? Muyu looked at the 3 doors and frowned. He had already broken through the 3rd hexagram and had the qualifications to become a Hotian disciple. The array faction should accept him as a disciple. But this time, his purpose was to find the array faction's Tao. If he only entered the array faction as a Hotian disciple, it would be difficult to attract enough attention. It would not be easy to meet the array faction's Tao. At the same time, he also understood that he could not be too conspicuous. If the array faction had a talented disciple, he would be known by all the major sects in the cultivation world. At that time, Muyu's identity would be easily exposed. In order to hide his identity, he had specially changed his face before coming here. Even so, he could not be too eye-catching. You have broken through the 3rd hexagram and have the qualifications to become a Hotian disciple. The first 3 doors are the doors you chose for the first stage. If you choose to give up on the 4th hexagram, you can open any door and leave here. If you choose to continue, you will need to open 2 of the doors as your path. The ancient voice rang in Muyu's ears again, reminding him of what to do next. If he chose to continue, he would need to open 2 doors. If he chose to give up, he only needed to open 1 door and leave. Muyu's gaze swept across the 3 doors. He did not know why, but he saw the life and death doors again. Life and death seemed to follow him like a shadow. His purpose in coming to the array faction this time was to release his life and death in the blink of an eye ability to save Kumu. Since that was the case, what was there to hesitate about? He walked over and pushed open the life and death doors without hesitation. He chose the death door and the life door. Is he crazy? Fanwin's expression changed slightly. Then he remembered that he had just offended Muyu. He was worried that Muyu would remember him, but now it seemed that he did not need to worry at all. He sneered, "Let him die with understanding." But this choice means... Zhan Bing revealed a strange expression. The 2 of them looked at each other. Obviously, they knew what choosing the life and death doors at the same time would bring. For thousands of years, many disciples have tried to choose the death door and life door method. However, none of them have succeeded. He will not be an exception. Zhan Bing could not wait for Muyu to die in the next hexagram. Otherwise, if Muyu broke through this hexagram and became a Zhongtian disciple, then with his status as a Hotian disciple, Muyu would hold a grudge against him. Outsiders did not know what the death door and life door meant, but there was no disciple of the array faction who did not know. To solve the 8 trigrams, each hexagram was harder than the last. At the 8th hexagram, The difficulty reached a terrifying level. It was basically certain death. So far, only one person in the Array faction had passed the 8th hexagram. That was the Array faction's famous founder, Array Tiandao. Death Door and Life Door meant that the order of the 8 trigrams would be disrupted. The 4th hexagram would be replaced by the Death Door hexagram. In other words, Muyu breaking through the 4th hexagram was breaking through the 8th hexagram. When breaking through the hexagram, the first hexagram would let people choose one of the ominous doors. They were the Death Door, Wonder Door, and Pain Door. Generally, no one was willing to choose the Death Door because it was too risky. So when choosing the ominous door, almost everyone avoided the Death Door and chose the Wonder Door or Pain Door. But Muyu directly chose the Death Door and a Life Door at the same time. When a Life Door and Death Door appeared at the same time, the order of the 8 trigrams would be disrupted and the 8th hexagram would be brought forward. The 8th hexagram is too difficult. Do we need to remind him? Zhan Bing asked tentatively. Fan Wen snorted. It's too late. I'm afraid he's dead for sure. Although we don't know what the 8th hexagram is, he definitely won't pass it. We don't even have a chance to attack him. Zhan Bing and Fan Wen didn't think Muyu could break through the 8th hexagram. So far, other than Array Tiandao, no one in the Array faction had done this. Muyu was originally going to break through the 4th hexagram, but his 4th hexagram was changed to the 8th hexagram. After the Life Door and Death Door were opened, the Stop Door disappeared, and the Life Door automatically closed, leaving only the Death Door open. An eerie, ghostly aura enveloped the entire gate of death. Waves of heart-palpitating fluctuations came from the gate of death. It was as if someone was whispering, but also as if someone was laughing sinisterly. Muyu was already used to this kind of aura. He had been dealing with things like ghost aura for a long time. His right hand flashed with a black light. Now, the spirit energy in his body was completely different. His body was mixed with a trace of death energy. He didn't know that choosing the Life Door and Death Door would change the order of the 8 trigrams. He also didn't know that he was about to face the legendary 8th hexagram. Even if he knew, he wouldn't retreat. He had to move forward. The moment he entered the Death Door, the entire formation door shook. An ancient energy seemed to come from the vast starry sky and rippled outwards. This energy passed through the entire Array faction's mountain gate, passed through the vast mountains, and passed through countless Array faction disciples without alarming anyone. This ancient aura rushed straight into the forbidden area of the Array faction. This forbidden ground was the core of the Array faction. The Array faction disciples didn't dare to casually step in. However, they all knew that once someone entered this forbidden ground, their understanding of the Array Tao would increase by leaps and bounds. This forbidden ground was a forest. It was still summer outside, but here, it was as if autumn had arrived. Leaves fluttered in the air and fluttered down on a person's body, covering his entire body. When the energy of the formation door swept into the forbidden ground, this person suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like lightning. The moment he opened his eyes, it was as if multicolored light shot out in all directions, illuminating the entire land. This caused the surrounding spirit energy to violently swirl. The leaves covering his body were instantly crushed into powder. Someone entered the 8th hexagram. A surprised voice came out from this person's mouth. This person was a middle-aged man without a white beard. His entire aura was restrained like a mountain that people admired. Gubo's calm face revealed an unconcealable surprise. If someone saw his face now, they would definitely be shocked. In their impression, this kind of surprised expression had never appeared on this person. His gaze was like a vast sea of stars. It passed through the entire sect, passed through the vast mountains, and finally landed on Muyu, who was in the 8th hexagram. Not a Xiantian disciple, but a man who fought to live after death. The middle-aged man frowned. Then, his eyes revealed an extremely disappointed expression. He casually glanced at Muyu and lightly snorted. There are always people who overestimate themselves. Sigh, I was happy for nothing. For thousands of years, only Array Heavenly Tao had passed the 8th hexagram. Among the younger generation of the Array faction, the most talented person could only pass the 7th hexagram. Although it was already very difficult to pass the 7th hexagram, the middle-aged man had been searching for someone who could pass the 8th hexagram. There was no other reason. In his opinion, only those who passed the 8th hexagram had the right to receive his inheritance. Chapter 370. The warm sunlight shone on the ground, making Muyu feel very comfortable. He was a little puzzled. Did he come to the wrong place? When he entered the gate of death, it was eerie. But after stepping into the gate of death, everything suddenly changed. There were no clouds for thousands of miles, and the sun was shining brightly. It was completely different from what he had imagined. He stood under a verdant Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree's green shade protected him, as if it had endless vitality. It swayed happily in the wind. Looking into the distance, there was a stretch of towering mountains and precipitous ridges, and his position was on a hillside. Muyu stroked the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree was real and not illusory. However, he understood that in the 8 trigrams, it was very difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. Many array formations would confuse a person's senses. One could not rely on touch alone to distinguish between reality and illusion. The Bodhi tree was not unfamiliar to him. Back when he was in Mu Yuming's territory, the old tree chief had brought him to see Mu Yuming's guardian, which was the old Bodhi tree that had lived for an unknown number of years. Do you need to find clues for this hexagram? Muyu circled the Bodhi tree and did not find anything unusual. He did not want to merge with the Bodhi tree because he could not be sure if someone was secretly observing him. There were indeed people secretly observing him, but after he entered the 8th hexagram, the 2 disciples on duty were unable to detect his movements. No matter who it was, they could not see what was hidden in the 8th hexagram. He looked at the morning sun, which was slowly rising from the east. This was a phenomenon that should not exist because, according to his calculations, the real time should be at night. The sunlight shone on the Bodhi tree, making the Bodhi tree even more vibrant. Muyu walked out of the Bodhi tree's shadow and bathed in the sunlight. Countless ripples suddenly appeared in the air, as if someone had thrown a stone into a calm lake. The surrounding scene suddenly became incomparably gloomy, and thousands of ghost fog swept towards him. Despair, fear, bloodlust, all sorts of negative emotions surged into his heart. Such a familiar scene made it seem as if Muyu had once again entered the deathly aura of the underworld grass. Muyu had never been able to overcome this feeling in the deathly aura of the underworld grass. He was almost lost in the layers of terrifying phenomena. If it wasn't for the dead tree pressing on his life acupoint and forcefully pulling him back from the world of deathly aura, he wouldn't have been able to get out at all. Muyu's body trembled. He saw Deadwood lying at his feet, covered in blood. His face was filled with pain as he struggled, wanting Muyu to save him. Save me. Why didn't you use your endless life force to save me? Why don't you go and kill Tian Bue? Why don't you go and kill Shi Dengtian? Why do you have to tolerate it? Gumu asked with great difficulty. I don't have the ability to kill them, I'm sorry. Muyu turned around in a panic. He saw the Bodhi tree behind him, and he retreated towards it. All the illusions disappeared. The sun was still shining brightly, and the mountains in the distance were still lush green. The sun slowly climbed up the branches and rose higher. The shadow of the Bodhi tree was also shrinking. Muyu collapsed under the Bodhi tree. He was extremely sad. He was afraid to see Deadwood struggling in front of him while he couldn't do anything about it. He was so weak. He couldn't even defeat Tian Bue at Stargate. How could he face the colossal Sanshone Palace? The Bodhi tree was like the last bright harbor in his heart. It could protect him from being invaded by the deathly aura. The cool shade of the tree gave Muyu a bit of comfort, allowing his heart to slowly calm down. Little mouse, what did you see? Dragon Tongue whispered. Little Shuai's face was bitter. The chicken legs I ate are full of maggots. I'm starving to death. I saw myself being refined into an elixir of immortality. Dragon Tongue was very unhappy. Little Shuai and Dragon Tongue were also affected by the 8th hexagram. They saw what they were most afraid of. Muyu knew what he had to do in this hexagram. He had to face the fear in his heart. If he couldn't overcome it, he could only be trapped under the Bodhi tree. I have to face all of this eventually, right? Muyu clenched his fists and stepped into the sunlight again. The air rippled again, and endless darkness attacked. Tian Bue stood in front of Muyu and smiled gently. His smile was so bright that it was impossible to dislike it. However, in Muyu's eyes, it was like the smile of a demon. He's very important to you, isn't he? Tian Bue's foot stepped on Deadwood's chest. Deadwood was already on the verge of death. His entire body was covered in blood. He struggled to open his eyes and weakly spat out 2 words to Muyu. Save me. Muyu's entire body trembled. He knew this was an illusion. He told himself to calm down. His gaze passed Tian Bue. There was a door not far behind him. Was it the exit? Muyu didn't look at Deadwood. He gritted his teeth and ran toward the exit. Are you really not going to save him? The sword in Tian Bue's hand was emitting cold, killing intent, but his smile was still so warm. Muyu couldn't help but look at Deadwood. Tian Bue's sword was already stabbing toward Deadwood's throat. No! Muyu roared angrily. He closed his eyes, but he still saw the scene of Deadwood's throat spurting blood. This wasn't something he could resolve with his eyes closed. He knew this was fake, but he still couldn't accept it. He wanted to kill Tian Bue to avenge Deadwood, but he couldn't do it. He had already arrived in front of the door. He knew that as long as he passed through the door, all the illusions would disappear, and he would pass this hexagram. His hatred for Tian Bue had reached the point where it was engraved in his heart. His eyes were red, but he couldn't stay. He struggled to open the door and rushed in. He looked at everything in front of him in a daze. The Bodhi tree was still swaying with vitality. The sun shone warmly on the ground. It had risen higher than before, and the Bodhi tree's shadow was getting smaller and smaller. He had returned to his original place. The door didn't take him through the 8th hexagram, but it took him back to the Bodhi tree. Why was it like this? Muyu was in a terrible mood. Anger shrouded his heart. His mind was filled with the scene of Deadwood begging him for help. But under the anger was a deep sense of powerlessness. He was so weak that anyone could easily crush him. Tian Bue, I will definitely kill you. Muyu's voice completely changed. It was no longer full of vitality, but low and hoarse. It was like a resentful spirit from the 9 hells, difficult to endure. The Bodhi tree swayed gently behind him. A few leaves fell lightly on Muyu's shoulder. The sun in the sky rose higher, and the shadow under the Bodhi tree continued to shrink. He gathered his courage and stepped into the sunlight for the 3rd time. Ripples spread and darkness descended. Heaven does not wait. Gentle smile was so real in front of Muyu's eyes that Muyu wanted nothing more than to tear that disgusting smile of his into pieces. You are afraid of me. You are right to be afraid of me, because you also know that you can never defeat me. Tian Bue's words were so intimate, as if he was explaining a simple principle to his little brother. But Muyu's shadow clone sword was already out of its sheath. The sword shadows mixed with killing intent slashed at Tian Bue. Heaven is not waiting. Grabbed Deadwood's collar and placed him in front of himself. Can you bear to do this? Tian Bue's voice was very polite. The shadow clone sword stopped an inch away from Deadwood's forehead. A strand of Deadwood's hair was cut off by the sword chi and floated in the air. Muyu's face twisted. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it to his father. Save me. Deadwood opened his eyes and said weakly. Muyu's veins bulged. He wanted to kill Tian Bue, but Deadwood was being held hostage by Tian Bue. Even though he knew it was all fake, he still didn't want to do it. You don't dare to fight me fair and square? Muyu said in a trembling voice. Tian Bue laughed, as if he had heard a very funny joke. He threw Deadwood away, and his body suddenly disappeared. Then, Tian Bue's voice sounded in Muyu's right ear. If I fight you, can you beat me? Muyu turned his head and met Tian Bue's gentle smile. His killing intent was awe-inspiring. The shadow clone sword had already swept out. But Tian Bue only stretched out 2 fingers and caught Muyu's sword without any fancy moves. Muyu wanted to pull back his sword, but the sword was firmly clamped and couldn't move at all. You are so weak. How can you fight me? Tian Bue lightly slapped out with his palm and imprinted it on Mu Yu's chest. It was like a mountain had crashed into Mu Yu. Mu Yu was sent flying. His organs had been displaced, and his ribs were completely broken. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he fell to the ground in a sorry state. He didn't even have the strength to get up. The damage that Tian Bue had done to him was actually real. Beg me for mercy, and I won't kill you. Tian Bue squatted in front of Mu Yu with a smile. He stretched out a finger and lifted Mu Yu's chin. Mu Yu panted heavily. Endless death aura surged out of his body and wrapped around his injured meridians, repairing his injuries. He clenched his teeth, but that palm had seriously injured him. He didn't have any strength to resist. Tian Bue didn't care. He stood up and grabbed Mu Yu by the collar. Your shelter hasn't disappeared yet. I can't kill you. I want you to see how strong I am and how unstoppable I am. I want you to slowly die in despair and powerlessness. You're just a weak person. Obediently stay under your Bodhi tree. Be a coward and don't come out again. Tian Bue sent out another palm. Mu Yu was like a kite with a broken string. He fell heavily into the shadow of the Bodhi tree. The surroundings became sunny again. The sun had already risen to the sky. The Bodhi tree's shadow shrunk to a point where only Mu Yu could fit. Mu Yu was seriously injured. The pain washed away his anger and blurred his consciousness. I will definitely kill you. Mu Yu spat out these words before he fainted. He was seriously injured. At the same time, he understood what this hexagram was about. This hexagram was a test of life and death. If you couldn't withstand it, then only death awaited you, unless someone came to save you. But Mu Yu had only chosen a way to challenge the hexagram. He didn't amazingly challenge the 8th hexagram. He wasn't like those lesser innate disciples who relied on their real strength to challenge the 8th hexagram. Lesser innate disciples would be valued by the higher-ups of the erased sect, but he wasn't. Over the years, there had been many disciples in the erased sect who chose to challenge the hexagram after challenging the 3rd hexagram. Without exception, they all died in the hands of their own fear. The higher-ups of the erased sect wouldn't constantly pay attention to what was happening in the erased sect. They would only appear when someone had challenged the 6th hexagram. Challenging the 7th hexagram and challenging the 6th hexagram were two completely different concepts. No one would save him. Chapter 371. This is a real injury. Little Shuai frantically checked on Mu Yu's condition. It used all of its spirit energy to help Mu Yu heal. Mu Ling had already rushed out and slowly landed on Mu Yu's chest. Its body was now shining with green and black light. The death aura of the underworld grass had invaded its body, causing it to become a bit strange. The death aura on its body continuously flowed into Mu Yu's body. The black spirit energy in Mu Yu's body seemed to be summoned and responded to Mu Ling's death aura. The black spirit energy began to quickly move through every part of Mu Yu's body. The wounds were attacked by the black spirit energy, and all of the necrotic tissues were swallowed by the black spirit energy. A heart-wrenching pain attacked Mu Yu and woke him up. The black spirit energy did not help him heal his wounds, but it was swallowing his body. But at this moment, the white spirit energy in his body also began to move. When the black spirit energy cleared away the necrotic tissues, the white spirit energy had already covered the wounds, causing the wounds to regenerate. The healed parts seemed to be stronger, and the ribs in his chest were even harder than the rest of his body. This process caused Mu Yu to be in so much pain that he wanted to die. He wanted to scream out loud, but he forcefully held it in. This was because he discovered that the black and white spirit energy in his body were strange. One was swallowing while the other was regenerating. The regenerated parts clearly made his body more resilient. Mu Yu, your body seems to have undergone a strange change. I'm not very sure what's going on. You have to hold on. Little Shuai touched the back of its head and was puzzled. Little Shuai was very knowledgeable about many things, but whether it was the changes in Mu Ling's sword or the black and white spirit energy in Mu Yu's body, they were all far beyond its understanding. This was because their appearance was unprecedented In little Shuai's strange memories did not record these things. Muyu opened his eyes and looked at the sun. The sun was gradually setting in the west, and the shadow of the Bodhi tree was beginning to elongate. The position where Muyu was lying was also gradually being illuminated by the sun. Ripples appeared in the surroundings again, and Muyu once again entered the world of darkness. Tianbu Wait was still looking at Muyu, as if he had expected Muyu to appear again. Muyu got up and slowly walked towards Tianbu. Deadwood's hands were tied up, and the sky was not waiting for him. He was suspended in the air and slowly rotated, causing Muyu's anger to soar again. When the sun sets, your shelter will no longer be able to protect your life. Heaven does not wait, said gently. I won't let you defeat me. In my eyes, you will definitely be a dead man. Muyu's face was filled with determination. His hatred was spreading in his heart. But when he saw Deadwood Daddy, he felt another wave of fear. He knew he couldn't beat Heaven is waiting. He was afraid that Deadwood Daddy would blame him for not doing his best to save them. The thing he was most afraid of was being completely displayed in front of him by this formation, and he might even be killed by it. He was afraid that if he died here, then he would never be able to avenge Deadwood Daddy, and Tianbu Wait would continue to be arrogant forever. Tianbu Wait slapped out again, hitting Muyu's chest. But to Muyu's surprise, his ribs didn't show any signs of being broken. It seemed that the black and white spirit energies devouring and rebirth had made his bones even harder. The black and white spirit energies devouring and rebirth were transforming his body. Even if you crush all the bones in my body, I will still kill you. Muyu clenched her teeth and said. Tianbu Wait's eyes flashed with killing intent. His body flickered, and he was already in front of Muyu. Do you know what the most painful thing in life is? Tianbu Wait grabbed Muyu's hands and clenched. Muyu let out a muffled groan. The bones in his hands had been crushed by Tianbu Wait. The most painful thing in life is that you have broken into the 8th trigram of the 8 trigrams formation. The 8th hexagram shows what you are most afraid of. Because you are here, you will never be able to overcome your fear. You can only watch as your enemy ravages you. Heaven Bue exerted more force, and Muyu's arms were also shattered. Terrible pain came, but Muyu had broken his arms more than once or twice. In the past, whenever he used the nameless swordsman's sword intent, his arms would break because he couldn't bear the huge power, so he could endure it. This is the 8th trigram. Muyu's eyes widened. He didn't know that he had chosen a fight to the death. He had always thought that this was only the 4th trigram. Yes, this is the 8th trigram. The 8th trigram will give you shelter. As long as the sun doesn't set, you won't die. Even if you're beaten to a pulp, you will still be hanging on to your last breath. But after the sun sets, you have no chance of survival. You can only watch as your fear erodes you step by step, and you're killed by a powerful enemy. You can't do anything but die unwillingly. Tianbu Wait was full of smiles. If he died in the 8th trigram, then it would be true death. He slapped out again, and a powerful palm energy completely covered Muyu's body. Overbearing spirit energy poured into Muyu's meridians. As you wish, I will destroy all your meridians and make you beg for death. Boom! Muyu's meridians seemed to explode. All his meridians were broken, and all his bones were shattered. His skin split open, and blood flew everywhere. The heart-wrenching pain spread throughout Muyu's body. His pain was so clear that it made him want to die. But this time, he didn't lose his consciousness. All the pain was clearly reflected in his memory, and it was shocking to the eye. Go back to your shelter and wait for death. When the sun sets in your shelter, we will meet again. That will be the last time we see each other. Tianbu Wait's smile was like a spring breeze. He casually threw Muyu, and Muyu was thrown back into the shadow of the Bodhi tree. The sun continued to set slowly. He couldn't move. Xiao Shuai came out and saw Muyu covered in blood. It was completely frightened. It didn't know what had happened to Muyu. It didn't enter Muyu's fear. Muyu couldn't even breathe, let alone speak. He only had pure consciousness. I'll kill Tianbu Wait. Muyu heaved a sigh of relief, but his heart was filled with endless fear. Tianbu Wait was much stronger than him in the real world. He was also stronger here. Whether it was in the real world or in the illusion array, he couldn't beat Tianbu Wait. Whenever he saw Tianbu Wait, he would think of Deadwood Daddy. He didn't know how to deal with his fear. Tianbu Wait had destroyed all the meridians in his body. Now, there wasn't a single part of his body that was intact. If it wasn't for the rules of the 8 trigrams, he might have died. No one would be able to save him. The death aura of Mu Ling's sword began to engulf Mu Yu's body. Black and white spiritual power surged out of his body. The black spiritual power almost swallowed up his entire body. But every time a part of his body was swallowed up, the white spiritual power would follow like a shadow, allowing the tissue to quickly grow back. The process of swallowing was very painful. The process of growing was also very difficult. He was constantly surrounded by pain. His entire consciousness was on the verge of collapse. But he had no choice. He could only grit his teeth. If he didn't recover before the sun set, then he really would die here. You still can't do this. Mu Yu's consciousness came to a forest. Gomong lazily said among the falling leaves. The 9th heaven's demon sealing array was sealed in his body. His body was in a mess, but the 9th heaven's demon sealing array was still intact. Where is the 9th heaven's demon sealing array in my body? Mu Yu looked at his body. His meridians should have been broken, and he shouldn't be able to stand or speak. But at this moment, he was intact. Gomong seemed to be tirelessly moving the leaves that trapped him. He casually said, "The 9th heaven's demon sealing array exists in every part of your body, including your consciousness. Even if you die and only your skeleton is left, the 9th heaven's demon sealing array will not disappear. Can you help me?" Mu Yu looked at Gomong. He couldn't feel any hostility from Gomong. Ever since the dead tree died and he saw Gomong here, Gomong seemed to have changed into a different person. He became very gentle. "I can't help you. You have to face all of this yourself." By the way, when facing fear, what you have to do is face it head-on and not blindly avoid it, Gomong said leisurely. Mu Yu was silent. He always wanted to face the existence of heaven is not waiting. But heaven is not waiting's detestable smile always made him burn with anger. He couldn't watch heaven is not waiting torture withered tree in all sorts of ways. "How should I face my fear?" Mu Yu asked after a long time. "That depends on how you view your fear. The scene you are afraid of is sometimes wishful thinking, isn't it?" Gomong raised his head as if he was observing something. Then he said, "The sun is about to set. Your shelter is about to disappear. The 8 trigrams heaven is not waiting will kill you. But you have to remember that the heaven is not waiting in front of you, is only the person you know. You think he is strong, so he is very strong. I have heard of the array gates 8 trigrams before. It is a test of one's heart. If you can't withstand it, you will die." The fallen leaves once again surrounded Mu Yu, sending his consciousness back to his body that was full of pain. "A test of one's heart?" Mu Yu murmured. Mu Yu's body was recovering at an astonishing speed. In just a few hours, his meridians and bones had been replaced. He felt that his body seemed to have become stronger. The sun slowly set in the west, and the light gradually dissipated. The true night finally completely enveloped Mu Yu. He knew that he no longer had a place to protect himself. The next thing he would face was true death. The heavens would not wait for him. In this hexagram, death was the true meaning of death. He had not overcome his fear in the world of netherworld grass before, but Deadwood Daddy had pulled him out. He had been running away from the fear in his heart. He did not dare to face Deadwood Daddy's death. He wanted to avenge Deadwood Daddy, but his enemy was so strong that he felt powerless. However, Jumang's words also told him that if he really wanted revenge, he had to put an end to the fear in his heart. He knew that he could not continue to be afraid. Chapter 372. Wither Tree was still hung in the air by Heaven Bu Wait. Heaven Bu Wait was still smiling as he watched Mu Yu slowly walk over. He wasn't even surprised that Mu Yu could recover so quickly. "Are you here to die?" Heaven Bu Wait said gently. But Mu Yu looked at Withered Tree's dying appearance and tried his best to suppress the anger in his heart. You can't escape all of this. You are afraid of me, so you will never be able to defeat me. You can only watch as I torture the people you care about. Your fear is what makes me strong." A whip appeared in Heaven Boo Wait's hand. He raised it high and whipped Withered Tree. Blood immediately soaked Withered Tree's clothes. "Save me." Withered Tree's eyes were half open. He was extremely weak. Muyu clenched his fists. "I know. You're still afraid of Withered Tree kneeling in front of me like a servant, right?" Heaven Boo Wait raised his hand, and Withered Tree fell heavily to the ground. He took the slave pill. "You are afraid of seeing Withered Tree being controlled by me. You are truly a coward. Come, my servant. You know what to do." Heaven Boo Wait kicked Withered Tree. Withered Tree's aura was in chaos, but the slave pill made it impossible for him to resist Heaven Boo Wait's orders. He slowly got up and knelt at Heaven Boo Wait's feet. "Not only are you afraid of this, you are also afraid that your master's undying body will be taken away by the threefold palace." A figure appeared beside Heaven Boo Wait. This figure was emitting a holy light. His face couldn't be seen clearly, but there was a familiar person lying on the ground. Feng Haochen's eyes were wide open. He was lying to the side, completely lifeless. "The undying body is finally in our hands." The threefold palace's guardian sneered. White light bloomed from his body, and then all the white light poured onto Feng Haochen's body. Feng Haochen's body also began to emit white light. Then, Feng Haochen slowly began to move. He stood up, and his entire body was covered in white light. The threefold palace's guardian had already possessed Feng Haochen's undying body. Muyu's anger was burning. He couldn't escape from this. He had to face it head-on. But what did it mean to face one's fears? Feng Haochen had always taught him that he had to live up to his own conscience when doing things. As long as he had a clear conscience, then what he did was right. A trace of clarity appeared in Muyu's eyes, and he slowly calmed down. "A clear conscience?" Muyu nodded thoughtfully. "You're more afraid of your own death, aren't you? Although I'm your fantasy, if I kill you in your fantasy, you'll die in reality as well. You're afraid that after you die, you won't be able to personally kill me in the real world, and you won't be able to avenge Deadwood. You're right to be afraid because you know that you're no match for me, whether it's reality or fantasy." A cold sword appeared in Tian Bue's hand, and he pointed it at Muyu. "Then, I'll end your fear as soon as possible, and you'll be free." Sword Chi crisscrossed, and a terrifying pressure came crashing down on Muyu. Endless killing intent wrapped around Muyu's body. If this sword pierced through, Muyu would die. Fantasy, fear. Face your own heart. Muyu repeated these words. Looking at the overwhelming killing intent, he suddenly realized something. Muyu's lips curled into a smile. Tian Bue's sword was already slashing down on Muyu. The terrifying sword Chi passed through Muyu's body, but didn't cause any damage to Muyu. Tian Bue's unparalleled sword Chi split open a huge crack under Muyu's feet, but Muyu was unharmed. "You?" Tian Bue's smile finally froze. "I don't deny the fear you speak of. I know you have the ability to kill me, because this is my fear." Muyu slowly raised his head, and a strange aura surged from his body. Tian Bue was shocked to find that he couldn't move. "I'm afraid that Deadwood Daddy will ask me for help, but I can't do anything. This is a fear I can't shake off because I feel guilty. Deadwood Daddy's death can't be separated from me." Muyu resolutely raised his feet and walked toward Tian Bue. "But I figure out one thing. Deadwood never asks anyone for help. Even in death, he never begs for mercy." Muyu continued walking. Deadwood had already stood up. He looked at Muyu from afar, and just like the image left in the blood jade ink crystal, he revealed a gratified smile. This smile made Muyu want to cry. Deadwood rarely smiled at him. Only when he did something to make Muyu suffer would he smile. That stubborn old man was often infuriated by Muyu. Occasionally, when Muyu was infuriated, he would laugh and vent his anger. This kind of smile was so precious to Muyu. He wanted to throw himself into his father's arms and cry like a helpless child. He wanted to pour out his inner grievances, but he held back. Now, Deadwood's father would never smile at him again. He could only work hard to make his father smile again. Deadwood Daddy's soul was still sleeping in the blood jade ink crystal. Muyu would definitely make him come back to life. This was because Muyu had said that he wanted Deadwood's father to truly live for him. I'm afraid of all of this. I know it's all fake, but it's useless to ignore it. I can't ignore my fear for this hexagram. I have to face my fear. Muyu walked in front of Tian Bue. Tian Bue's smile had already disappeared. You are my fear. Your power comes from my heart. In my heart, I know I can't beat you, so I don't have the courage to fight you now. The more I'm afraid of all of this, the stronger you are. Muyu snatched the sword from Tian Bue's hand. But I understand now. The one who should be afraid is not me, but you, because you will definitely die by my hands. Tian Bue fell to his knees at Muyu's feet. A trace of unconcealable fear appeared on his face. No matter how strong you are, I shouldn't be afraid of you, because you don't deserve to make me feel fear. Muyu's sword slowly slid across Tian Bue's throat. Tian Bue's eyes widened. When I'm no longer afraid, your power will disappear. How can you hurt me? Muyu's hand tightened, and Tian Bue's head was cut off. A look of unwillingness appeared on Tian Bue's face. His head was separated from his body, and he had no ability to resist. He had been arrogant before, but now he was like a dirty slug lying on the ground. You are stronger than me in the real world, but how can I let you affect me all the time? If you can defeat me even in an illusion, how can I avenge Deadwood Daddy? Muyu coldly stepped on Tian Bue's smiling face, and then kicked his head away. He turned to look at the guardian of the Triple Palace. My master's body is not something you can covet. The white light on Feng Haochen's body began to flicker unsteadily. Then, something seemed to tear the white light apart and forcibly pulled it out of Feng Haochen's body. You started a war to rule the Triple Palace. You are so selfish. No matter how strong you are, you will be destroyed by me. Muyu clearly slashed his sword. The white light that filled the sky was instantly shattered by the sword chi and was swallowed by endless darkness. Many people would encounter the thing they were most afraid of when they entered the 8th hexagram. Everyone knew that it was an illusion and wanted to ignore it, go through the wooden door, and leave. But running away from fear was not the way to solve the 8 trigrams. They could only return to their shelter. However, the shelter would gradually decrease, and fear would gradually erode the shelter. When the person who entered the hexagram realized that the illusion could kill them, even the most strong-willed person would panic. Because they could not defeat the thing they were afraid of in the real world, they would naturally think that they could not defeat it in the illusion. The illusion was no different from reality to the person who entered the hexagram, and their fear became a real threat. So the more afraid they were, the stronger the fear in the illusion, to the point where it could threaten their lives. Ignoring fear would not work. They had to face it. When one was no longer afraid of fear, then fear would no longer be able to hurt oneself. But until now, who could truly face fear? Fear was called fear because it was a pit in everyone's heart that could not be crossed. It was an insurmountable gap in everyone's heart. If they could not face fear and blindly ignored it, then they would eventually be eaten away by their own fear. The powerful part of the 8th hexagram was that there was no difference between the illusion and reality. Things that could make you retreat in the real world could still make you feel invincible in the illusion. Things that could kill you in the real world could still destroy you in the illusion. Many people would panic when they realized that their lives were threatened, and the fear would become even more rampant. Muyu was like everyone else. He was dominated by fear. He knew that he could not defeat Heaven Waiting, and he also knew that Heaven Waiting could kill him in the illusion. But he understood the origin of fear. The way to defeat fear was to look at it in the right way. You had to control fear and not let fear control you. Muyu looked at Kumu and Feng Haochen. His heart was clear, as if nothing in the world could stop him. You remember my words well. Not bad, Feng Haochen said as he stroked his white beard. Muyu nodded. This was his imagination. He thought that his master would definitely say this after knowing how he defeated fear. You're really useless. You're almost done for. Kumu cursed. Dad, can't you praise me with good boy, not bad? Muyu asked. No. Kumu snorted. Muyu smiled. He knew that the dead tree wouldn't praise him. The conversation between him and the dead tree was something he had imagined. Kumu had always been a stubborn person. Praising Muyu would make him feel that he had lost his dignity. Muyu wanted to protect Kumu's ridiculous self-esteem, so he did not intend to deliberately change anything. Feng Haochen and Kumu turned into specks of light and disappeared in the darkness. Then, the sun began to rise from the east, dispelling the darkness. The Bodhi tree reappeared in front of him. He saw the door in the distance. He knew that he would pass this hexagram by passing through this door. He pushed open the wooden door and found himself back in the room. There were 2 doors in the room. One had death written on it, and the other had life written on it. The death door was already closed, while the life door had just opened. What Muyu did not know was that when he passed the 8th hexagram, the entire array door once again emitted a heart-palpitating wave. This wave did not disturb anyone. Instead, it directly passed to the middle-aged man in the array faction's forbidden area. The middle-aged man opened his eyes again. His eyes were filled with extreme shock. Someone finally passed the 8th hexagram? The middle-aged man's starry eyes landed on Muyu. His heart was surging. After waiting for so long, that person finally came? He passed the 8th hexagram, which was the most difficult as the 4th hexagram. The remaining hexagrams can't stop him at all. The middle-aged man nodded slightly. As long as you pass the remaining hexagrams, then the entire array faction's doors will be open for you. Passing the 8 hexagrams meant that he was the most talented disciple of the array faction. The array faction would not hesitate to teach him all the array techniques. Zhan Bing and Fan 1, the 2 disciples on duty, also revealed shocked expressions. They never thought that Muyu would actually pass the most difficult 8th hexagram, especially Fan 1. He thought about how he had looked down on Muyu. Who would have thought that he was such a talented person? He immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Muyu looked at the life door. He knew that he had passed the 4th hexagram and was now considered a disciple of the Zhongtian sect. Entering the life door was the 5th hexagram. However, he did not move. After struggling for a while, he finally gave up. Just now, Muyu already knew that the 4th hexagram had been replaced by the 8th hexagram. He had passed the 8th hexagram, so the remaining hexagrams were not enough to affect him. However, he did not want to be too ostentatious. He only wanted to learn some basic array techniques. Then, he would focus on studying the profound Xian arrays that Deadwood Daddy had left behind. He also wanted to find out more about the array Heavenly Tao. He hoped that he would not be harmed by the Triple Palace's array guardian. Most importantly, this gossip made use of the fear in his heart. It allowed him to see Deadwood being tortured. He felt very uncomfortable. He did not want to be influenced by the gossip. He felt guilty towards his own Deadwood Daddy. He did not want his father to be used as a test to pass. He could have passed the remaining hexagrams and become the center of attention of the array faction. However, he chose to give up, for Deadwood Daddy and for himself. He hoped that in his heart, Deadwood's father would always be that stubborn old man who scolded him but was full of concern. Although Deadwood's way of expressing his fatherly love was very rude, Muyu was already used to it. He didn't want anything to tarnish Deadwood's image. I don't want to continue. How do I end this formation door? Muyu asked in a clear voice. What? Zhan Bing and Fan were both shocked. They were still in shock because Muyu had become the second person in the array faction to pass the most difficult 8th hexagram. But Muyu's next words nearly made their eyes pop out of their sockets. Chapter 373. He actually gave up on the formation? The middle-aged man frowned. His expression was uncertain. He could understand why Muyu gave up on the formation. Muyu had already passed the 4th hexagram and had even passed the 8th hexagram. If there were no accidents, he would definitely pass the remaining hexagram and become the second person after array Heavenly Tao to pass the 8 trigrams in the past 100 years. If he could completely pass the 8 trigrams, it would definitely cause an uproar in the array sect. However, once a genius disciple appeared in a sect in the cultivation world, the other sects would immediately know. This would also make it impossible for Muyu to keep his identity. He was now the disciple of a true god and had an unclear relationship with the Pill Cauldron sect. To be on the safe side, the Array faction would definitely investigate this person's background. No sect would accept a disciple who already had a master. On the contrary, if he was just a culmination disciple and hid his cultivation, then no one would investigate his background. The possibility of him joining the Array sect would naturally be higher. The facts prove that Muyu's worries were correct. The Array sect's inspection of Xiantian disciples was particularly strict because only Xiantian disciples could truly understand the core of the Array sect. Xiantian disciples must have a clean background and couldn't be people of unknown origin. This was to prevent spies from other sects from infiltrating. The Pill Cauldron sect was not the only sect like the Array sect that treasured their own things. However, at that time, Kumu's identity in the Pill Cauldron sect was not ordinary. When he accepted Muyu as his disciple, others only thought that Kumu had already confirmed Muyu's identity, so they didn't suspect anything. Muyu stood in the 8 trigrams formation. He didn't know that there were 3 pairs of eyes watching him at this moment. Fan 1, who was guarding the formation, rolled his eyes. He thought about how he looked down on Muyu. Now, even if Muyu gave up on the hexagram, he was still a culmination disciple and had a higher status than him. If the Array sect leader knew that he had passed the 8th hexagram, he would definitely be valued by the sect leader. He gritted his teeth and said to Jean Bing, "Junior brother Jean, can you do me a favor? I accidentally offended him just now. Although he has only passed 4 trigrams now, he is actually someone who has passed 8 trigrams. If the elders in the sect know about this, they will definitely pay attention to him. By then, I will die even more miserably. Can you help me hide the fact that he chose to die and then be reborn? You want me to lie to the elder?" Jean Bing was shocked. Lying to the elder was a big crime. In any case, only the 2 of us know that he has passed the 8th hexagram. The sect master will not know. He will only think that he is a Zhongtian disciple who has passed the 4th hexagram and will not pay too much attention to him. If you help me, I'll give you the Millennium Meteorite Array base that I obtained back then. The core of a formation was the formation base, and the quality of the formation base determined the power of the formation. Fan Wen had obtained a 1,000-year-old meteorite array base by chance. He had originally planned to use it to set up a perfect array in the future advancement test. But now, in order to prevent Muyu from taking revenge on him in the future, he could only reluctantly part with it. As Hotian disciples, they had the opportunity to become Zhongtian disciples. Every year, an advancement test would be held, and the Hotian disciples who participated in the test would set up a formation array. If they could obtain the approval of the elders, they could become Zhongtian disciples, and their status would also rise. Jean Bing was very tempted. The 1,000-year-old meteorite array base could at least double the power of the formation array he set up. He gritted his teeth and said, "Fine, I won't tell anyone about him passing the 8th hexagram. I'll just treat him as an ordinary Zhongtian disciple." Jean Bing and Fan Wen had already stepped into the formation array, and both of them put away their inner thoughts. Passing the formation array was just giving up. They had no right to interfere. Congratulations, junior apprentice brother, on becoming a new disciple of our Array faction. May I know junior apprentice brother's name? Jean Bing said with a smile, his tone quite polite. The status of the disciples of the Array faction was different. Hotian disciples were the lowest existences, while Zhongtian disciples were more powerful than Hotian disciples. Therefore, Jean Bing did not dare to offend Muyu, because in the future, Muyu's status would definitely be higher than his. "Senior apprentice brother, you're too polite. My name is Feng Mu." Muyu nodded slightly. He originally wanted to call himself Lan Feng, but he had already used this name before, so he did not want to use it again. Since junior apprentice brother Feng Mu has passed the 4th hexagram, why not continue? Fan Wen could not help but ask. He no longer had the arrogance from before, and at this moment, he had completely changed into a flattering expression. Muyu shook his head and said, I don't know why, but when I passed the fourth hexagram, I was exhausted. I no longer had any energy to pass the remaining hexagram, so I had no choice but to give up. His words did not arouse Zhang Bing's and Fan Wen's suspicions, because both of them knew that when Muyu passed the fourth hexagram, he was actually passing the eighth hexagram, which was the most difficult. If Muyu had exhausted all his energy, then it was reasonable. However, Fan Wen and Zhang Bing had already reached an agreement not to let others know that Muyu had passed the eighth hexagram, so they acted as if nothing had happened. Therefore, although Muyu had chosen to pass the hexagram in the face of death, his fourth hexagram was still the fourth hexagram. Even if the fourth hexagram was actually swapped with the eighth hexagram, it was still concealed by those with ulterior motives. Junior apprentice brother, you are now a Zhongtian disciple of our array faction. Let me take you to report. Fan Wen said enthusiastically. In fact, his understanding of array formations had almost reached the level of a Zhongtian disciple. As long as he passed the test, then he would also be a Zhongtian disciple. At that time, he would not have to worry about Muyu taking revenge on him. Muyu did not continue to challenge the array formation, but the people of the array faction did not appear to say anything. He pondered for a long time and then closed his eyes again. Zhongtian disciples and Xiantian disciples were different. Zhongtian disciples lived in a room with 2 people, while Xiantian disciples lived in a room with 5 or 6 people. The treatment was completely different. Muyu was arranged into a room. According to Fan Wen's introduction, this person's name was Cheng Zhuo. Cheng Zhuo was a dark-skinned youth, a few years older than Muyu. He had already been a disciple for 5 years, and his cultivation was at the nascent soul stage. Feng Mu, how many hexagrams have you passed? Cheng Zhuo was a very talkative person. As soon as Muyu arrived, he couldn't wait to ask. 4. Muyu replied casually. There were only 2 beds in this room, and all the living facilities were complete. Cheng Zhuo smiled and said, I have also passed 4. Even Zhongtian disciples are divided into high and low ranks. Those who have passed 5 hexagrams are much stronger than those who have passed 4. You have just arrived, so there are some rules that you must know. Do not offend Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai. They are the 2 overlords of the Zhongtian disciples, and are also sworn enemies. The 2 of them secretly compete with each other. Their cultivation and array Dao are similar, so they will definitely come looking for you. Looking for me for what? Muyu felt very strange. Forming a faction, of course. The competition between Zhongtian disciples is very fierce. Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai are both fighting openly and secretly in order to become Xiantian disciples. Once a new disciple joins, they will try to win him over. Cheng Zhuo said, forming a clique? Muyu smiled and shook his head slightly. He didn't take these things to heart. Cheng Zhuo looked at Muyu's indifferent appearance and kindly reminded him, you'd better choose a side. Although neither of them are good people, if you don't choose a side, you'll be ostracized everywhere in the future. Then which side did you join? Muyu asked. Luo Failong. His protection fee is relatively low. Cheng Zhuo smiled embarrassedly. Protection fee? Muyu blinked. Why did he feel like a hooligan? After you pay the protection fee, if something happens, they will protect you. It will also be easy to get resources for learning Array Dao. Luo Failong requires 5 spirit stones every month, and Ji Wenkai requires 6. Ji Wenkai's cultivation is at nascent soul 9th layer, and Luo Failong is at nascent soul 8th layer, but Luo Failong's achievements in Array Dao are higher than Ji Wenkai. Cheng Zhuo said. Muyu shrugged indifferently, asking him, a 5th layer out-of-body stage, to call a nascent soul stage big brother. How could those 2 be worthy of it? However, Muyu's current spiritual power fluctuations were only at the foundation establishment stage. There were some things that shouldn't be publicized. Cheng Zhuo told Muyu a lot about the rules of the Array faction and the usual cultivation time. In the morning, there would be a special elder to teach, and in the afternoon, it was free time, usually used to cultivate or practice Array Dao. When Cheng Zhuo talked about where Zhongtian disciples usually ate, Xiao Shuai's figure had already disappeared and went to the cafeteria. I heard that the Array faction's heavenly Array Dao ancestor is very powerful. Can you tell me more about him? Muyu pondered for a while and asked. This was what he wanted to know the most. After all, he came here to find out about the heavenly Array Dao. Hearing this, Chengzhu's face was filled with respect. The heavenly Array Dao ancestor is the pillar of our Array faction. You've more or less heard of this. He usually doesn't appear in the Array faction and is always in the Forbidden Grounds. Only disciples who have made great contributions to the Array faction or Xiantian stage disciples can enter the Forbidden Grounds. Entering the Forbidden Grounds is seen as the greatest glory of the Array faction. This is the dream of us disciples. Great contributions or Xiantian stage disciples. Muyu wasn't a Xiantian stage disciple, so if he wanted to enter the Forbidden Grounds to see the heavenly Array Dao, he would have to make a great contribution to the Array faction. This seemed a bit difficult. What is a great contribution? Muyu asked. For example, finding some ancient treasures to hand over to the Array faction to save the Array faction from the abyss of suffering. This is all nonsense. How would our Array faction be in danger of being destroyed? Of course, there's also a chance. Defeating a Talisman Sect disciple in a Talisman competition is a great contribution to the Array faction. Chengzhu's face was filled with disgust when he talked about the Talisman Sect. Talisman Sect? Muyu had heard of the Talisman Sect before, but he didn't know much about it. He didn't understand why Chengzhu hated the Talisman Sect so much. The Talisman Sect and the Array faction are actually enemies. Our Array faction was originally called the Array Talisman Sect. You should know that the most famous sects in the cultivation world are the 8 sects, right? Actually, a long time ago, there were 9 sects under the direct control of the 3rd palace on the 3 continents. The Array Talisman Sect was the 9th sect. Chapter 374. Chengzhu continued. The Formation Talisman Sect was co-founded by Patriarch Zhun Xian and Patriarch Fu Xian. However, the 2 patriarchs had disagreements and looked down on each other. As a result, the Formation Talisman Sect split into the Formation Sect and the Talisman Sect. Their power was divided. Both the Formation Sect and the Talisman Sect could no longer be compared to the other 8 sections. Therefore, there are only 8 sects left in the cultivation world. There are no longer 9 sections. After the Formation Talisman Sect split into the Formation Sect and the Talisman Sect, both sects believed that their own Formation Dao and Talisman Dao were unique and neither of them was willing to submit to the other. Therefore, every year, the Formation Sect and the Talisman Sect would hold a Formation Talisman competition and mock each other to prove that their Dao was better. The Formation Sect has not recruited any Khanate disciples for 10 years. Needless to say, the Talisman Sect is getting stronger and stronger while our Formation Sect's overall strength has been declining. We have not won a single Formation Talisman competition in the past few years. This made the sect master feel very aggrieved. Therefore, he set a rule that as long as any disciple of the Formation Sect wins the Talisman Sect in the annual Formation Talisman competition, it would be equivalent to making a great contribution to the Formation Sect. They would be allowed to enter the forbidden area of the Formation Sect and receive guidance from the Patriarch of the Heavenly Formation Sect. Chengzhu felt very helpless about the decline of the Formation Sect. The Formation Talisman Sect was originally a family. However, due to their different cultivation philosophies, they went their separate ways and followed their own understandings. When the disciples of the 2 sects met, it was as if they were enemies. This was especially so in the past few years when the Talisman Sect began to rise. The Formation Sect had been suppressed by the Talisman Sect. The disciples of the 2 sects had reached the point where they would fight to the death. In the cultivation world's understanding of formations, only Formation Masters and not Talisman Masters were mentioned. In the beginning, the Formation Sect was also much stronger than the Talisman Sect. However, for some reason, the Formation Sect seemed to be going downhill in the past few years. The Talisman sect was faintly showing signs of surpassing the Formation sect. This made the Formation sect feel an unprecedented crisis. The disciples of the Talisman sect have gone too far. After defeating us in the Formation Talisman competition every year, they would mock us without restraint. Now, we can't raise our heads when we meet the disciples of the Talisman sect. We would fight whenever we have a disagreement, but we would always lose. Chung Ishua said angrily. How many disciples do we have now? Even a Xiantian disciple is unable to defeat a Talisman Grandmaster? Muyu knew that the Xiantian disciples were the elites of the Array faction. They were also the ones who would take up the responsibility of the Array faction in the future. If even the Xiantian disciples were defeated, then the Array faction would be in an awkward position. Actually, the titles of Xiantian, Middle Heaven, and Hotian disciples only apply to those of us who haven't finished learning about formations. Those who pass the test are called Xiantian, Middle Heaven, and Hotian Array Masters. Our Array faction has a large number of Hotian disciples, followed by Culmination disciples, and only one Xiantian disciple. The rest have all become Array Masters, so we can't gather enough Xiantian disciples to participate in the Array formation competition every year. Chung Zhuo explained. Just one? Muyu felt a little incredulous. Were Xiantian disciples so rare? After the disciples of the Array faction finished their basic Array formation course, they had two choices. For example, Hotian disciples could choose to participate in the Array Formation Master examination and become a Hotian Array Formation Master. They could start doing various things for the sect, including setting up and maintaining various array formations for various sects in the cultivation world. If they didn't choose to become an Array Formation Master, then they could choose to participate in the advancement test. Hotian disciples could pass the advancement test and become Middle Heaven disciples, continuing to learn intermediate array formation knowledge. Middle Heaven disciples could also choose to become Middle Heaven Array Masters or participate in the advancement test and become Xiantian disciples. As for Xiantian disciples, they could only choose to take the Xiantian Array Formation Master examination. The Array Formation Master examination was much simpler than the advancement test. Many Hotian and Middle Heaven disciples who felt that they had no hope of advancing, plus they were getting older, would choose to become an Array Formation Master. They could work for the sect and obtain more cultivation resources. Some people were confident in their own talent and wanted to further their studies, so they would participate in the difficult advancement test. However, the number of people who succeeded was not many. Like Luo, Feilong, and Ji Wen Kai, the two Middle Heaven disciples that Chang Zhuo mentioned, they wholeheartedly wanted to become Xiantian disciples, so they didn't participate in the Array Formation Master examination. Instead, they constantly tried to take the advancement test. Unfortunately, they had already failed for several years. The Talisman faction was the same as the Array faction. Their disciples were divided into Xiantian, Middle Heaven, and Hotian disciples. In the Array formation competition between the Array faction and the Talisman faction, it was stipulated that the participants must be disciples, not Array Formation Masters or Talisman Masters. The Array formation competition consisted of Xiantian disciples, Middle Heaven disciples, and Hotian disciples. Each sect would send out 3 Xiantian disciples, 3 Middle Heaven disciples, and 3 Hotian disciples. They would use the Tao of Arrays against the Tao of Talismans and compete in various techniques. How many Array Formation Masters does our sect have now? Muyu asked. Our sect doesn't lack Hotian and Middle Heaven Array Masters. We have more than 500 Hotian Array Masters, more than 1,000 Middle Heaven disciples, more than 100 Middle Heaven Array Masters, and more than 300 Middle Heaven disciples. However, we only have 19 Xiantian Array Masters. Including the only Xiantian disciple, we barely have 20. Only 20 Xiantian Array Masters? So few? Muyu was speechless. The Array faction was really going downhill. If they didn't recruit any more Xiantian disciples, then in a few years they would really be suppressed by the Talisman faction forever. The sect leader of the Array faction was also very anxious about the current situation. However, he couldn't casually change the difficulty of the advancement test and increase the number of Xiantian disciples. This was because the Middle Heaven disciples who didn't meet the requirements couldn't learn the Tao of arrays of Xiantian disciples. Even if he let the two most talented Middle Heaven disciples, Luo Feilong and Ji Wenkai, become Xiantian disciples, they still wouldn't be able to keep up with the Xiantian disciples' lessons. Learning the Tao of arrays had a lot to do with talent. Do you plan to participate in the advancement test and become a Xiantian disciple? Muyu asked. Cheng Shua shook his head. I know my talent. It's impossible for me to pass the advancement test. In a few years, I'll obediently participate in the Middle Heaven Array Master's examination and become a Middle Heaven Array Master. The status of an Array Master in the cultivation world couldn't be compared to that of an alchemist. However, no one dared to provoke an Array Master. Many sects' mountain protection arrays, transmission arrays, and the like were designed and maintained by the Array faction and Talisman faction. The Array faction and Talisman faction relied on these to earn spirit stones. As for the difference between the Tao of arrays and the Tao of Talisman, Chengzhua couldn't explain it, so Muyu could only temporarily suppress this doubt in his heart. He had just arrived at the Array faction, so there were many things he needed to explore on his own. The next day, Muyu woke up early and followed Chengzhua to the Array formation class. There were currently more than 300 Middle Heaven disciples, and they were separated according to the progress of each disciple's studies. Chengzhua was a warm-hearted person, and although he and Muyu studied in different places, he still brought Muyu to the Zhongtian disciples' novice class, and then left by himself. The Array faction was located in the middle of countless mountain ranges, and mountain ranges were the best places to lay out arrays. This was also the main reason why the Array faction chose this place. Muyu's novice class was not in a house, but in an open space. This open space didn't seem to have anything, and was only surrounded by white fog. But when Muyu stepped into the white fog, he was surprised to find himself in a spacious hall. The Array faction was filled with all kinds of array formations, and most of them were used for camouflage. Perhaps even the lake in front of him could be a house. If one didn't walk into the array formation, they would never know what was in front of them. At this moment, there was no one in the hall, so Muyu began to look around. The walls of the hall were hung with all kinds of 8 trigrams diagrams, and each 8 trigrams diagram had different annotations, explaining what would happen if there were fewer horizontal lines or more vertical lines. There were also some types of array bases, including Xiantian array bases, Middle Heaven array bases, and Hotian array bases. Different array bases would have different effects on array formations. Muyu looked at these array formations and didn't feel that it was strange. This dead tree had already told him about it, and he also understood it in his heart. It was just that he couldn't show it too obviously, and he couldn't let others see any clues. You are the newly recruited Middle Heaven disciple. After about a quarter of an hour, a man who looked to be in his 30s walked into the array formation. Muyu bowed slightly. Greetings, Array Master. The man stood with his hands behind his back, and his cultivation was at the nascent soul stage. He looked at Muyu and said, How old are you? 19. Muyu didn't hide it. 19? That's considered very old for a new disciple. Your cultivation is only at the foundation establishment stage, and you'll need to work hard to catch up with the other Middle Heaven disciples. Let me introduce myself. My name is Song Qingyu, and I am a Middle Heaven Array Master. I am responsible for teaching new Middle Heaven disciples about Array Tao, so you can call me Song Zhongsher from now on. Song Qingyu said, in the Array faction, Array Masters had a higher status than the other disciples. Even if they were Hotian Array Masters, their status was the same as the Middle Heaven disciples. So when a disciple became an Array Master, the other disciples would take the initiative to give them the respect they deserved. Muyu nodded and said, This disciple will remember. How much did you know about Array Tao before you entered the sect? Tell me in detail, so that I can arrange for you to learn in the future. Last month, Array Master Lu brought back a new Middle Heaven disciple from outside. His knowledge of Array Tao is too little, and he needs to learn from the beginning. You must also tell me about your own situation. Don't pretend to know when you don't know. Song Qingyu said seriously. Song Qingyu was specifically responsible for guiding the new Zhongtian disciples. In the past few years, there had been too few new Zhongtian disciples, so his job was relatively easy. He only needed to teach Muyu the basics, and then there would be other Array Masters to teach her. Muyu's current understanding of Array Tao was probably similar to Song Qingyu's, but in order to deceive others, he deliberately pretended to only know a little. After all, he couldn't show that he knew everything here, otherwise it would arouse suspicion. Song Qingyu spent the entire morning teaching Muyu the basics of gossip, and Muyu would always pretend to be enlightened from time to time, and then casually thank Song Qingyu, which made Song Qingyu very happy. This morning was wasted. Muyu shook his head, somewhat helpless. Song Qingyu had already left, and Muyu was a new disciple, so he didn't have anything to do in the afternoon like the others. Because he was only at the Foundation establishment stage, he had to go to the Array faction in the afternoon to learn the cultivation techniques of the Array faction. This made Muyu feel a little ridiculous. He was an out-of-body stage cultivator, and he had to pretend to be a newbie to enter the sect. This was something he had no choice but to do. He had just left the main hall when he found that there were already 10 people standing outside, divided into 2 groups, provoking each other. Luo Filong, I trust you've been well since we last met. A young man said with a fake smile. Ji Wenkai, don't pretend anymore. The new Middle Heaven disciple last time was yours. This one should be mine. Another young man sneered. That depends on his choice. Luo Filong said leisurely as he picked his nails. Then everyone's eyes fell on Muyu, who had just come out of the novice class. Chapter 375. When everyone saw Muyu's appearance and cultivation, they all had strange expressions on their faces. How could he only be at the Foundation establishment stage at such an old age? At this moment, Muyu's disguised appearance was about 19 years old, which was about the same age as Muyu's real age. However, her cultivation was only at the Foundation establishment stage. Compared to everyone present, she seemed a little clumsy. These 10 or so people were all Zhongtian disciples. Some of them were even younger than Muyu, but even the weakest of them was at the Jindan stage. Little brat, how old are you? Why is your cultivation only at the Foundation establishment stage? Luo Filong frowned and asked. Muyu glanced at these people and said casually, 19 years old, cultivation at the 5th heavenly layer of Foundation establishment. What? 19 years old, and only at the 5th heavenly layer of Foundation establishment? Isn't this cultivation talent too bad? Can this kind of person even enter the sect? This kind of person will only drag us down if he follows us, right? The crowd suddenly burst into laughter. All of the Zhongtan disciples present had entered the Array faction at the age of 12. Even the oldest one had entered at the age of 16. Although their cultivation was very low when they first entered, after a few years of cultivation, their cultivation had increased by leaps and bounds. Even the weakest of them had reached the 9th heavenly layer of Golden Dan. In front of this group of geniuses, a 19-year-old Foundation establishment stage cultivator was nothing. Your cultivation is even worse than a Hotian disciple. How did you become a Zhongtian disciple? Did you enter through the back door? Luo Filong looked at Muyu with disdain. Muyu turned a deaf ear to the ridicule and shook his head. I didn't enter through the back door. I entered through the 4 trigrams of the 8 trigrams. Almost every disciple of the Array faction had passed through the 8 trigrams, but these Zhongtian disciples had only passed through the 5 trigrams at most, not much different from Muyu. However, they did not know that Muyu had entered the sect by using the method of facing death. The 4 trigrams he had passed through was the 8 trigrams that no one other than Array Tiandao had passed through. Unfortunately, no one knew about this because the 2 Ho Tian disciples who had been guarding the gate had deliberately concealed this matter. So, Muyu didn't feel like making a fuss about it. You're already 19 years old, and you're still in the Foundation establishment stage. You'll only drag down the reputation of us Zhongtian disciples. Luo Failong swept his gaze over Muyu arrogantly, before turning to Ji Wenkai and saying, "This trash is yours. My people are all the best of the Zhongtian disciples. I don't like trash following me around." Trash? Muyu was stunned. He was the disciple of the third stage real god Lu. His cultivation had reached the out-of-body stage a long time ago. He was also a well-known figure on the Supreme Immortal Leaderboard. He had even created an uproar in the world of cultivation. Wherever he went, people would talk about him. However, he was actually called trash by a bunch of ignorant original infant stage fellows. This was really something new. Ji Wenkai retorted coldly, "I'm not a garbage collection center. I don't collect garbage. I think this trash is a good match for you, so I won't fight with you over him." Ji Wenkai had only glanced at Muyu from the beginning to the end, and had already dismissed the idea of taking Muyu as a follower. He and Luo Failong were both the best of the Zhongtian disciples, and were also the most likely to pass the advancement test and become a Xiantian disciple. The reason they formed cliques was to collect more cultivation resources from other disciples to prepare for their own advancement test. Usually, there was constant friction between them, both openly and covertly. However, if their follower was a trash, they wouldn't be able to squeeze any benefits out of him. Moreover, it would also give their sworn enemy a chance to mock them. No one wanted to let the other have the upper hand. Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai glared at each other, sparks flying in their eyes. Then, they both sneered and left with their followers, too lazy to waste any more words with Muyu. "We were actually looked down on? Muyu, can you bear it?" Little Shuai lazily asked from Muyu's pocket. Muyu didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he watched all this. The actions of these two people in his eyes were like childish children fighting, completely looking down on him. Thinking about how he was now known by everyone in the cultivation world, he was actually looked down upon by two rookies from the Array faction. He was really speechless. But this is also good, at least they won't always come and bother me. Muyu was very happy to see this happen. Trash, it was fine. It was just children playing house. Did he have to correct their laughable thoughts? It was a pity that he couldn't let them know his true identity. Otherwise, they would definitely regret saying such words. A genius youth being looked down upon as trash. Muyu was probably the first person in the history of the Array faction to be looked down upon. In the afternoon, Muyu groped her way to the place where the disciples of the Array faction could practice the basic mental cultivation method. After all, the Array faction used to be a branch of the Array Talisman sect. Their training method was very mysterious and could speed up the comprehension of array formations. Although this method couldn't be compared to the falling dust method, it still had its merits, especially its ability to assist in setting up arrays, which was very important for array masters. Without a doubt, the other Zhongtian array master, who was guiding the new disciples, also complained a few times when he saw Muyu's age and cultivation level. He muttered, "The array faction is really getting worse and worse every year. They're taking in all kinds of cats and dogs." Muyu rubbed his nose. He didn't know how to refute the words of this nascent soul stage array master. With great difficulty, it was finally nighttime. He laid on his bed and thought about when he should find a way to participate in this year's Array Talisman competition and obtain a victory to obtain the qualifications to enter the Array faction's forbidden area. Cheng Shua hurriedly came back. He came to Muyu's bedside and asked with concern, "I heard about today's matter. You must be in a bad mood, right? Why wouldn't I be in a good mood?" Muyu asked, puzzled. Cheng Shua said, "Everyone is saying that our Array faction recruited a useless Zhongtian disciple. His age is too old, and his cultivation is too low. Even Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai weren't willing to accept him as a follower. I only just found out that they were talking about you." Muyu sat up and shrugged indifferently. "It doesn't matter, I don't care." "It does matter," Cheng Shua said solemnly. "If you don't join a faction, you will be ostracized by the other Zhongtian disciples. Even the spirit stones you receive every month will be deducted. Every Zhongtian disciple receives 100 spirit stones, 5 Hodian formation bases, and 2 Zhongtian formation bases every month. If you don't have any backing in the array faction, your things will be snatched away by others. Why are we all from the same sect? Why would we snatch things from each other? Muyu frowned. Cheng Zhua made a shushing gesture, then ran to close the door and windows tightly, whispering, "You don't know how deep the water is." Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai have almost monopolized the resources of the Zhongtian disciples. Originally, we Zhongtian disciples were given 6 Hotian formation bases every month, but each of them took one away. Formation bases are essential for us to learn spirit arrays and set up spirit arrays. With one less formation base, we have one less chance to practice. Everyone is suffering in their hearts, but there's nothing they can do. If you don't join any of them, I'm afraid you won't even get a single formation base. Muyu felt that this kind of petty theft was really annoying. It was no wonder that the array faction had declined. Everyone was snatching cultivation resources from each other, resulting in them not having enough resources to practice and improve themselves. It would be strange if the overall strength of the array faction could improve. Thinking about it, losing to the talisman faction every year was inevitable. With Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai, these 2 blood-sucking bats, there would never be a day for others to shine. This is too unreasonable. Don't those Xiantian array masters care about it? How many Zhongtian disciples will they waste? Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai's actions were something that even Muyu, an outsider, could not stand. This is an unspoken rule between the Zhongtian disciples. Furthermore, Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai are both the elites of the Zhongtian disciples and are the most likely candidates to become Xiantian disciples. A Xiantian disciple is equivalent to dozens of Zhongtian disciples, and the array masters above all place a lot of importance on them, so they usually turn a blind eye to their actions. After all, the cultivation world is a world where the strong prey on the weak. They have strength, so they can plunder more resources. Cheng Zhua shook his head. The cultivation world is indeed a world where the strong prey on the weak, but we can't use this sentence to skip over some dirty things. You must know that if a sect wants to develop, it doesn't rely on 1 or 2 people, but everyone working together. If 1 or 2 people are strong, it is true that the sect can grow stronger, but sacrificing everyone for the sake of 1 or 2 people is the most foolish thing to do. The more talented disciples are oppressing the less talented disciples. The good ones are getting better and better, while the bad ones are getting worse and worse. The polarization is very serious. This is not the way for a sect to develop, Muyu said seriously. He was not a politician, nor was he a strategist. He was just a person who did not want to be bound by the rules of the world. However, he also understood some basic survival principles. A sect should be owned by everyone, not just a few people. The main force of the array faction was actually the Zhongtian disciples, but these Zhongtian disciples spent every day trying to curry favor with Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai, while their own talents were being suppressed by the 2 blood-sucking bats. It was a very sad phenomenon. For thousands of years, the array faction had produced many blood-sucking bats like Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai. It was because of this unspoken rule that the array faction's influence was declining. If Luo Failong and Ji Wenkai could really become Xiantian disciples, then it would be fine. However, after so many years, they still could not pass the advancement test. Their existence was a stumbling block to the array faction's development. I understand the logic, but unfortunately, I can't do anything. Without strength, everything is just empty talk. Cheng Zhua sighed. Muyu did not say anything. He did not want to get involved in this mess. His goal this time was only to learn some basic formation techniques, so that he could understand the contents of the Xian formations. Perhaps he could see the array Heavenly Tao and ask him to remove the 9 heavens sealing devil formation in his body. The development of the array faction had nothing to do with him. As long as these 2 did not provoke him, he would not say anything. Don't worry. If you need anything in the future, just tell me. I still have a certain amount of authority among the Zhongtian disciples. I will protect you in the future. No need for protection fees. Cheng Zhua was very loyal. Little Shuai was originally eating a steamed bun that he had stolen from the canteen. When he heard this, he laughed so hard that he spat out the meat in his mouth. He laughed and said, "Big brother, you also need to have the strength to do that. Eat your steamed bun, don't talk." Muyu stuffed another steamed bun into Little Shuai's mouth. Chengzhuo looked at Little Shuai with interest and said, "Spirit beasts that can talk are not common. What is so great about this little beast of yours?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.